Well, hello again.
Hello. Wow.
Here we are once more. To everyone out
Yep.
there, welcome. Welcome to
Welcome.
we are the Confabulators. I'm Liz,
And I'm Dave.
and we are here to confabulate, which
Quite vociferously. And hey, if you want to know what that means, ask your parents.
yeah, ask your parents. Big words for them. And if they don't know, well, there's always Google. Google.
Yeah.
Good old Google. Well then, we are here today continuing the adventures of the horror series. So last time we were talking about our experiences with horror, what brought us into this genre. So I think we've fairly well established that I'm the noob, and Dave, you are
Yeah.
the seasoned.
Yep. Seasoned by Charles Lee Ray.
I love it. I love it. But for today, we are answering the age-old question: what makes a good horror game?
That's a very good question, and I'm glad you asked it.
Yeah, it's a loaded
Um,
question.
oh yeah. But I think in part the difficulty with that question is there is a lot of subgenres within horror. And there are things that work on some people, but not others.
Yeah.
Um, to give an example, I know that there are people. There's a particularly famous content creator who has a deep fear of mannequins,
Oh dear.
and mannequins don't do anything to me. I do not care. They're just like standing there or whatever, silently, not moving.
Yeah.
And even in horror games where they move, or like where they're like moving behind you until you turn around, you know, um
They're just kind of
it,
oh look, it's part of the scenery.
yeah, it's more like, okay, then I guess it's there. And then like if it's holding still, I don't know, you could just like cut its head off or something. You can like football kick it.
I
um
mean, totally fair. And you say that, and I have to agree as somebody who actually owns, other than a few like sewing model type mannequins and dress forms, I actually have a full-size store mannequin in storage. Once
that's
you've
very funny.
assembled and disassembled a mannequin and had to dress it so many times, it sort of loses any intimidation factor.
Yeah, and I'm not talking about the movie The Mannequin from the 80s.
Oh,
But yeah, mannequins, I don't get it myself. But for others it's an issue.
yeah.
And that's great. And I say that like with all seriousness, because everybody has their fears, has their things, with rare exception. And I mean like very rare exception.
Yeah.
The exception being that there are people who are born and they're the brain thing that doesn't that they have that is supposed to make fear trigger in them
Yeah.
does not work.
Yeah, it's like one of the lobes or something. Yeah, yeah, it's like other than if you are like essentially bodily incapable of experiencing the emotion of fear.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I think there might be a way to actually make a game or something like that that expresses that in such a way that you could pivot a fear into the notion.
Oh,
But I don't know what that would look like or how that would come off.
I feel like
Uh,
something like that would also require a lot of background research and talking with like first finding and then talking to people who experience that.
yeah, yeah.
But that would be
Um,
crazy.
which quick side shout out to the Sinua developers, because they communicate with people who have certain types of mental disorders that they are expressing in the Sinua saga, uh,
Okay. Well,
through her actions and experiences,
oh, that
which
has me
is
even more
amazing.
intrigued. By the way, thank you for
Yeah,
that. I am looking forward to actually playing those games.
yeah.
So,
There's a behind the scenes like documentary that was made that shows them like interviewing people who experience these things that Senua experiences, psychologists, psychiatrists, and all that stuff. They
Mm.
do everything they can to like make sure that they're authentic, that they're not like, misrepresenting or anything like that, exploiting. Um, and at the end of it all, they let those people play test the game
Oh,
and talk about it after, which
oh,
was
weird.
really cool to hear.
Yeah,
And
that's cool just 'cause that's so much more work into development at
yeah,
like the most core level, but it's, even in fiction, they say like with fiction, even in writing, it's like, if you can ground something that's fictitious, but you can ground it in reality, or at least ground it in logic, you know, then you add authenticity.
yeah.
So,
Um, and the lady who portrays her, the mocap and voice actor,
hmm
she was originally she's part of the dev team, but she was originally just a stand-in until they could find somebody, and
yeah.
then they just kept her because she looked really good at it. She did a really good job.
Hey, way to become the
Um,
star of the show.
yeah, why
Oh,
not?
here, just stand in. Well, okay, but side note, isn't that kind of like how Harrison Ford ended up as Han Solo? Because originally he was just
He's
he
like a carpenter.
he was a carpenter and he was working on like Lucas's deck, and then he asked him if he could read opposite for some auditions, and then he realized this guy had chemistry and skill. So I was like, and
Yeah,
now you are like one of the most iconic science fiction characters in history.
yeah, really, really well done to him. His
Oh, I
I'm
love
sure
that.
his career will take off and go very far.
I was
I
gonna
believe
say
in
he has potential. He really has some potential to him.
him. This young upstart is gonna go places.
Yes. How old's the man now? He's like what, like 70 something? I don't know.
He's in his 70s, maybe
Yeah.
80s.
Yeah. I
Uh,
think he may be closer to 80 because he was what? Because I think Hamill's in his 70s. And he had about
Probably.
10 years on them when they
Yeah.
shot that. And he was in his 30s. But okay, so
Okay, so
I love it. I love it. Yeah, no, you
getting
got a good
back,
point though. I mean, getting back to like the horror games, like just the idea of the subjectivity of horror, like I mean, just thinking about like I mean, honestly, I feel like I wouldn't say it's a trope, but it's definitely a common stereotyping like the other one clowns. Like
yeah.
clowns are a common like, you either love them or you hate them or you don't give a shit either way. But like, I mean, for some people it's like great, others it's really creepy. I mean, looking even at television and movies, like you've got the Terrifier franchise, what some people love, some people won't touch, and it's a creepy clown. I personally will never watch those. They sound a little bit too close to torture porn for my sake, for my interest. But or too slasher for me. But like even like clowns there, Supernatural has a character who's like Dean is scared of, or no, it's Sam who's scared of clowns. So it's like it's a common thing. So though I would say between clowns and mannequins, you bring up an interesting observation, which is that, even though not everybody is affected by them, there is a common it's common in horror to see elements of fear be based in sort of pseudo human figures like clowns. You've got these, it's people, but it's people like not quite people, like it's not quite human. And then you've got mannequins, which is this artificial human. And so it's this sort of it's not quite right.
Mhm.
So I'm trying to
Yeah.
think, like that just to me that was I just realized that was like, oh, that is something you do see. Like if it's almost like it's an underlying thing of it's people, it's like a discomfort with something that's not quite correct or not quite normal.
And then on top of that, there's real life ties to those
Yeah.
things. To go to the clown example, John Wayne Gacy,
Yeah.
Pogo the clown.
Yes.
He is a real monster and horrifying being who did horrible things to people, children specifically.
Yeah.
And yeah, that guy he deserves the prison sentences and all that stuff that he got and so forth. But people have a real horrified fear of him,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of that also gets tied into clowns, right?
Yeah.
Because people have that real life experience, whether it be like directly with the victims that he had or family of the victims, or indirectly with like the cultural zeitgeist that kind of goes, oh man, John Wayne Gacy, the clown guy, yeah, he's a bad dude.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
They sort of, you get it becomes such a loaded subject, that I'm sure like some psychiatrist or, psychiatrist somewhere has had a field day looking at like the underlying, like I'd be curious kind of what the underlying elements are, because there seems to be a common root for people, because even mentioning clowns and historically, figures like John Wayne Gacy and that, but then even looking at elements too, like, carnivals, like, like the whole concept of carnivals. Carnivals are either fun or they're fucking terrifying. And it just depends on how the media portrays them, but it comes back to this element of something that is sort of forcing, it's almost an element of being forced to be happy. You know, I'm trying to think how, except that I'm also seeing the signs that, all over LA, there's billboards for the movie Smile, which I guess kind of touches on the whole like sort of underlying theme of, it's like you shouldn't be, but you're being told to exhibit an emotion that doesn't make sense, or doesn't really make sense, because it's one thing to be told be happy, it's another thing to be happy.
hmm,
And being told to be happy is kind of uncomfortable. Like, I mean, from a perspective as a woman, it's like when like a random stranger tells you to smile. It's like, I smile because I'm experiencing a reaction that makes me smile. I don't smile because somebody tells me to smile.
mhm.
So it's like
Um,
it's an ingrained discomfort with sort of being told to experience an emotion that otherwise we experience organically.
yeah. Um, and then to add on to that, there's also I'm going to go to smiling, and then I'm going to go to carnivals. Um, so with
We're
smiling,
jumping around here.
so with smiling, there's not only the aspect of like women and how they've been told like typically to smile by guys for like very creepy reasons or domination reasons, so
Yeah.
forth. But also in the animal kingdom, there are a variety of animals who take smiling as a threat.
Yeah.
Various primates, apes, so forth. For example, like if you go to a zoo and you see a gorilla, you shouldn't smile at them because they'll take that as a threat. That's just part of their language,
Yeah,
like
like,
how they communicate.
yeah, for us, we communicated as happy. For like pretty much any other creature, showing your teeth is a threat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, look at how many times. I mean, we all see the videos of the dogs that somehow have learned to smile, and I think at this point, culturally, at least in the States, we see that and go, "Oh, that's so adorable. They know how to smile." But like realistically, like, if you're not comfortable with dogs and you see a dog smile, you're going, "The fuck is that dog gonna bite me?" And it's like, no, but but it's this weird element where we've almost taught dogs to exhibit a predatory or a threatening behavior, and I think it has more to do with the fact that, like, especially because they're domestic animals, they see us show teeth, but we show teeth in a non-threatening context. So they sort of pick up showing teeth in a non as something that doesn't necessarily mean a threat.
Mhm.
Whereas anywhere else, it's like you don't show teeth.
Yeah.
Yeah. If they, and by the way, off note, like chimpanzees, gorillas, primates, when they show their teeth, it's like, oh yeah, remember these things can murder you, like rip your arms off.
Chimps are horrifying. I hate them so much.
I know. I know.
I,
Crazy.
I really do. They're
Oh,
monsters.
oh my
Um,
gosh.
but yeah, I always took dogs smiling as them just like trying to keep cool because they pant, right? So it looks like
Yeah.
they're smiling, but really they're just like sweating
Yeah.
and trying to like cool down their system.
Yeah. I've seen some, just like when I was working in pet care, like you do see it where some have picked it up. And I mean, really, after seeing it, I'm definitely convinced that it's more that whatever natural reason they might have originally had to do it, they've picked it up as those that kind of do it, especially if it's like they do it like the videos you see of people being like, look at so and so, he's smiling. And, that some have picked it up as more of a learned behavior based off the people around them. I mean, again, environment shapes them. So, you
That's
know,
very fascinating.
yeah, hold up. Gosh, we're like uncovering scientific research topics on like behavior and social behavior.
Yeah, but good horror stuff.
Right?
Um,
Yeah. Jumping back to horror games though, since we've
well,
gotten so far.
wait. I wanted to mention carnivals.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Just real quick. Have you heard of the? You, so carnivals are either very fun or they're very scary. Um, there's a lot that goes into carnivals, though. There's the whole trope of like running away to join the carnival, right?
Mhm.
Or like people getting abducted and disappearing with the carnival.
Yeah.
Um,
On the
there's also
misfits.
like, yeah.
Mhm.
There's also have you heard the term carny?
Oh yes, I am well
Yeah.
familiar with that term. Yeah.
So there's a lot of little things that tie into carny, right? A lot of it is kind of disgusting and gross.
Yeah.
Some of it is tied to wrestling, professional wrestling, like the old wrestling
Oh.
guys would be called carnies because they would wrestle at the carnival, and they were
Oh,
like
didn't know that, but
old
makes sense.
salty, yeah, they were old salty sons of bitches who were very mean. Uh, it would like beat the hell out of you if you like mess with them. Um, but yeah, as far as like the carnival goes, part of that dips into like the stereotypes and stigmatism that's afforded to people who make their living traveling and performing.
Yeah, which goes into another deeply ingrained cultural element, which is you know, nomadic cultures and,
Mhm.
even modern nomadic cultures. So Roma, all of that, avoiding the, well,
Yeah,
previously commonly used term since that's technically considered offensive. So, but, Roma and that culture, which they, I think anyone coming from those cultures and even in history, you can see that those cultures were frowned upon in a lot of
yeah,
societies, uh, for a variety of reasons. Part of it being that it's this they just don't fit with the norm. I think it in some ways it almost comes down to, if I was going to boil it down to one thing, it's just straight up xenophobia, which is we fear what we don't understand, and these
yeah,
people we don't understand. And I think, especially in nomadic environments, culture becomes very insular because you're moving around a lot. So you're not, I mean, I mean, you've moved around, didn't you? Like as a kid, more like I didn't, but when you move around a lot, it's a little different putting down roots in tons of places, especially if you're not staying anywhere super long versus
Mhm.
if you're in somewhere a long time. And I think in nomadic cultures, because it's almost so much more prevalent, there's an element of, you don't integrate into society the same way. You're always
yeah,
somewhat aloof from society.
yeah.
So, and
So
society looks on that and is uncomfortable with it.
yeah, and I find that a little funny given my background.
Well, I don't think you
To
see it as much with like people growing up, like especially I mean I grew up in DC and I realized in high school that a lot of my classmates had moved around quite a bit because their parents were military or government or various things. But I think because culturally it was not so much nomadic, just as so there was still kind of more of an element of you integrated in wherever you went, but really looking at like truly nomadic lifestyles.
yeah, yeah, and speaking in terms of like my background, which is being a military brat, right? Like
Ah, you were one
I
of those.
traveled. Yeah, I got to travel for like a really long time, like my entire childhood and such.
Yeah.
And when you're doing that and you spend at most 3 years in one place, if you're lucky, like it's very hard to like make friends. It's hard to like make contact. It's hard to like really know a place. And so you get like feelings of um just not really having anywhere that you can settle down in. You might feel like a jitteriness to like go somewhere often, or
Mm.
like um or it could be the opposite. You may like when you have that chance, you may like cling to something and just like never want to move. Like
Yeah.
that happened with me during my junior high and high school years. I wanted to stay in one place and never move because I wanted to have friends. I wanted to have a place. I wanted to be somewhere,
Yeah.
right? Um, and it just never really stuck. It just never really happened for me.
Yeah.
And so like it leads to a lot of loneliness in that aspect. I want to be clear. I'm not speaking for like true nomadic folks.
Yeah.
I'm speaking like in this semi, I guess, pseudo nomadic would
Yeah.
be a good way of wording it. A pseudo nomadic lifestyle wherein you move because some sort of company, or well, not company, but like government entity demands that you move, and because of contracts that is your obligation, whether
Yeah.
you directly signed for it or not. You move.
Yeah. When your network tends to become those within whatever kind of inner circle are also a part of that experience, whether it's coworkers. I mean, I didn't experience it growing up. I grew up, I mean, I literally, my folks moved to their home in Virginia. They didn't think they were going to be there long. They thought it was only going to be a year and a half. 3 years later, I was born. And then I didn't move until I was I had basically I turned 30 after I left there, but I mean I'd basically been there 30 years when I actually moved out. But so it was a different experience because like I have like childhood friends who have literally like spent my whole life knowing, where it's almost a different experience in friendship because even though we've all drifted away because we knew each other, like I've got this one friend where like I haven't talked to him in a few years, and I haven't seen him since his wedding, but like, anytime we've seen each other, no matter how long it's been, it's like more like seeing a cousin, a close cousin, because at this point we've been part of each other's lives so long that we just pick up where we left off because it's been so many years. But then on the other side of it, moving out west, I mean, I was out here in California, kind of able to really connect, have a community out here for a little bit, even though it wasn't a big one. But then, like, the last 4 years has been much more like where I've moved every year since, I mean, I've moved at least once a year since 2020.
Mhm.
And especially going up to NorCal and then to Texas, it was like, I mean, when by the time I was leaving Texas, part of me was like, I'm going back to a place where I have some roots and I have a community because it was so isolating moving around that much, and my community was my coworkers. And I'd go to places and I wouldn't even feel obligated to put down roots extensively because it'd be like, well, I'm not going to be here long.
Mhm.
And so yeah, it's a weird isolating feeling.
Yeah.
And part of why I ended up with a dog. At least I've got company. But speaking of, his head is sitting on my foot right now.
uh but yeah, to just briefly brush up on back onto truly nomadic folks. um there's a lot of like we have like some aspects of uh as far as like pseudo nomadic experiences. We have experiences of like some isolation and whatnot.
Yeah.
um but that's on like us, so it's a little weird. But as far as like truly nomadic folk, when people mention them, there's a lot of mistrust there. It's kind of like the experience and like the whole, I don't know what you want to what you would call it. Like the whole thing like flips. So it's not turned internally. It's more like an external thing. Like people view you as something different. And I'm speaking in terms of like the stereotypes that we hear about people who are nomadic folks.
Yeah.
Um, the mistreatment of nomadic folks, the stereotyping of nomadic folks. I think I said that first, but I'm saying it again because hey, it's important,
And it does
you know.
happen. I mean, I feel like it's only been in maybe the last 10 years that as a society, and I say more society generally, but we've started to kind of be a little more self-aware about how we have conversations about that.
Yeah. And then you get things like Stephen King's Thinner, um, which is pretty gross.
I haven't read that
Eh,
one yet, but I read the summary and it was like, what the fuck is this
yeah.
book?
Well, I haven't read the book. I've watched the movie,
Oh,
and
there's a movie? Of
yeah,
course there
and,
is.
and it's like a bunch of Roma folk. Something bad happens, and because they didn't get justice in the courts, one of them curses the lawyer, like a stereotype would,
Oh my
and
gosh.
it sucks.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Oh,
that's that's bad horror.
yeah,
Bad
that's
horror.
yeah. Don't do that,
No
people.
biscuit.
So bringing it back to horror gaming, as we go
Thank
way
you.
off onto social divergent topics,
Look, it was important
it's
enough.
relevant.
We could we can go back to good horror games.
I mean, okay, so good horror games. I guess the real question I would say is like a good place to start with that though is like, what do you look for when you're looking like? I'd say my question is, what do you look for in a horror game?
If
What elements what elements attract you to a game as a horror game or make you like it?
That's a very good question, and I'm glad you asked it.
I'm glad I
So
asked it too.
so when it comes to horror, um, it's not specifically like it's not genre. By genre, I mean like type of game per
Hmm.
se,
Yeah.
right? Because there's games like Darkstalkers, which is a fighting game, but it's got horror elements to it.
Hmm.
There's FMV games like the Simulacra series, which is horror as well, but it's more. It's also got like detective elements and stuff to it.
Yeah.
Um, there's one that I'm currently playing that I would qualify as horror, called Blasphemous.
I've heard of that.
Blasphemous 2. It's a Metroidvania, so Super Metroid, Castlevania, Symphony of the Night, so forth and so on.
That's the one
Um,
you said. I think I saw you say something the other day about like a 2 hour boss fight.
yeah, yeah. I
It's like
spent
a
like
Final
2.5
Fantasy boss
hours.
fight. Honestly,
Yeah,
I didn't watch the video you shared, but I mean, I was sitting because as soon as you said the time, like I started having like flashbacks to like some of the boss fights in Final Fantasy X.
nah.
It was like
The
trauma.
the thing about Blasphemous, that one specifically is Blasphemous 2.
Okay.
But the thing about Blasphemous is it's got a Dark Souls difficulty to it. So it's much harder than what you would typically experience.
Hmm.
Um
Yeah, and I've
but
read enough about Dark Souls, and people have said that it's brutal.
it's pretty challenging. Um but part of the framing of Blasphemous, the series, that I find fascinating is that a bunch of Spaniards made it, and there's a lot of religious thematics to it.
Hmm.
Um, and there's a lot of like horrific things that happen in there, like people losing toes and like really weird, bizarre monstrosities that appear. Um,
Oh my
Having to sacrifice people. Like there's a lot of wild stuff in those games, but it's got a greater like thing that they're speaking to that relates to the Spanish and their history, specifically involving a lot of ties to religion and such,
I was
right?
thinking of the Inquisition, honestly, and like the imagery you see in media and also just historically what we know of the Inquisition and what went on with that. That was immediately what I thought of.
Yeah. And if you look at like a lot of the images in it, you see a lot of like really fascinating stuff. And despite all the bad and horrific things that are happening, the people are still fervently religious. They're still fervently believing.
Hmm.
Instead of God, they say the miracle. You
Oh,
know,
oh.
like it's got a lot of depth to it, which is pretty cool.
Would you say
Um,
that makes it like that depth, like lens to the horror element to it,
uh, I I
or
would
more
say
just like
yes.
Yeah.
in subtle ways.
Okay.
Um,
Like world building almost.
yeah. Because a lot of it is seeing a lot of the devotion that people have to what they're trying to do in life.
Mm.
And when they don't, when things kind of like fail them or when things fall apart for them, it's really tragic.
Okay.
To
Oh,
to
that's
give a couple of examples, in Blasphemous 2, so far part of the story that I've gotten is that there's like this lady, I think she's called like Our Lady or like the Lady or My Lady, something like that. And her beauty is such that she couldn't help but look at herself. And it was to the point where and I'm not quite remembering it, but essentially she made a wish to the lake, and that wish was to be able to have nobody else be able to look at her because she wanted her for herself. And so as people were looking in the lake, it was transforming them and doing horrific things to them.
weird.
uh and then the other one from the first Blasphemous, there's a guy who he has his hands tied behind him. He's always like bent over at the waist. He's always looking down at the ground, and the part of his belief is that he's following this like saint, and the saint has done the same thing, and all he does for his pilgrimage is walk.
Hmm.
That's it, right? And so as you meet him and as you help him like find his way, by removing obstacles or like connecting paths and stuff like that, he gives you stuff. And then when you get to the end where his journey ends, he arrives at this statue of this saint, and he asks himself like, well, now what do I do? And then like he you open up a way for the saint statue to move, and he goes inside the room, and he realizes that it was all for nothing, and he kills himself.
Oh.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
man.
it's intense.
So it's that
And
sort of it's that
all he
sort of
was
tragic
doing
horror.
was, yeah, all he was doing was trying to find peace. He was trying to find something that was like more,
Oh.
and it ends like that for him, which that's a real blow because like he's such a nice dude. He's just trying to get on his way, and then that happens, and it
Mhm.
sucks
So for you, it's
for
kind of
him.
like it's the lore and almost the way they approach people behavior
Yeah,
and how
I
that's, I mean, I
so
could definitely like even just, when you read about behaviors and when I've seen behaviors of people in society, like there are times when you see people or if you hear them talk or that it's like a deep-rooted discomfort
mhm,
almost
yeah,
when they're so driven by an internal belief that
mhm,
essentially is not what it seems.
yeah, yeah.
So,
But uh, so part of my background, you know this, but they don't. The audience don't. Hi, audience. Um, Part of my background is that I have done acting and I've done filmmaking for a good number of years, and so one of the things that really draws me in is characters and what's going on with them. I really love character driven stories because it's an exploration of this person, typically, and a lot of the things that they go through. Um, and so when it comes to those little things, even if it's like a side character like that, I'm always fascinated as to like what they're doing, why they're doing it, who they are, who they were, and seeing where they go.
mhm.
Um, and
The
so
kind of the actor's
a lot
element
of,
of unraveling the character to understand them.
yeah. And so the thing that draws me to horror, to bring it back around, um, is the exploration of horror through the lens of a character,
Mhm,
exploring like who they are, why they're experiencing what they're experiencing, what those things mean to them, and like what does it mean for them to, for lack of a better term, beat the the horror, and if not, what does that mean for them, right?
Mhm.
Um, just because every horror is different for people, going back to the example of like the content creator who's afraid of mannequins, right?
Mhm.
I'm not afraid of mannequins, but they are. Why are they? What
Yeah.
does it mean for them? Is there a way for them to explore that through experiencing mannequins in some way? Like if we were to make a movie or a game for them, right? Would there be a way that they could explore that and discover things about themselves?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and
And,
essentially
and
kind of work
that's
like certain therapeutic tools work to work with people with past traumas or extreme phobias to understand where they're rooted.
yeah.
So,
So that draws me in. Um, I would also say like comedic stuff can draw me into, but not always. Um, but a lot of them can.
mhm,
It just depends on how the humor hits.
that's
Like
fair.
trying to think of an example that didn't hit, but I'm not thinking of one offhand. But like good ones are like Shaun of the Dead hit pretty well.
That did.
Um, Tucker and Dale versus Evil hit pretty
Oh
well.
God.
Um, I would qualify Mars Attacks, but I think that one would be tenuous. Some people might say it's only sci-fi.
It's
Um,
I would say I
it's
to me
it's on the line.
it is. It is. It's kind of that I think it teases it as like it doesn't as obviously cross into horror, but it sort of teases it like the horror sci-fi elements that we get like in Alien.
Yeah,
It just is a little less obvious because there's so much of it that is framed in this sort of social and scientific lens.
and comedy.
Oh yeah,
All right.
Uma Thurman's
So
head on a chihuahua.
was that was
That was
I think that was Sarah Jessica Parker.
was it? Okay,
I
yeah,
think
It
so.
was Sarah Jessica Parker. I can never remember.
I think
Yeah,
yeah,
it
I'm
was
pretty
Sarah
sure
Jessica
it was.
Parker. Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
It was somebody's head on a chihuahua.
Yeah.
Ack ack.
Um trying to kiss Pierce Brosnan. Because at that time, who wouldn't? Um,
True, that was in his Bond era.
oh yeah. So how about you? What makes a good horror game for you?
Oh, see, for me, some of it, like, it's interesting because with gaming, I definitely would say I have a different set of parameters than maybe I look for than what I would look for, say, like in movies. Like, you talk about character driven, just to give an example, like folks, I know there's a lot of mixed opinions, especially with like the later seasons in The Walking Dead, but I love the character explorations that take place in it because they use the context of a sort of zombie apocalypse world to explore a lot of different themes and human behaviors and how humans respond to things, and also some themes that you don't see a lot, like redemption, healing, how to move you know, past traumas and things like that. So to me, I find that very, very interesting. In games, one of the things I will say at least if I'm looking for Twitch, like if I'm looking to go and do a stream and play a new horror game, I definitely am looking for something that balances environment and world building with oh, I don't want to say action like it has to be action, but if my heart's not racing at some point, like, you've seen some of my channels, and I feel like some of my channels, I feel like some of the most fun I have when I'm streaming and with some of these games is when I'm so fucking freaked out that I'm like panicking and running everywhere and then probably running into something and then getting killed. And whereas some of these other horror games, they're very interesting, but if I'm looking for something that's more adrenaline, that's more immersive essentially, then I start to kind of fall out of it. So I would say for me, it's almost an immersive experience, um like Outlast, frankly. It's not my favorite game in the world, but Outlast does the immersion very well. And I think balance is actually the element where you're sneaking around and this with these crazy mental patients are tracing you and you're freaking the fuck out and trying not to die, and it's horrific, and suddenly one grabs you and spins you around and you're dead. So I like my jump scares. What can I say?
And
So, but I'm not as particular about that with films though. But in games, I think because for me, horror part of it is for me, horror gaming is I didn't intend it that way, but once I really started to get into it, especially because um I think I mentioned the other week, my first horror game was playing Resident Evil 4, like the original one. And which is funny since I'm sure there are people out there who would go, that's not horror. And I'm like, well, the first half is more. And then it starts to go a little like crazy. It's a thing. But I was so freaked out the first time I tried to play it. Like, I was so freaked out. Chainsaw would come in. I hadn't even gotten to the title screen, and I'm just like sitting there panicking and had a moment of epiphany after I like got through that and was like hyperventilating in my room of like, this is fun, but I feel like it'd be more fun if I could share it with other people. So there's a communal aspect, and then for me with horror gaming is an element of it almost is that it is because I cope with that with humor, with being freaked out with humor. And so it becomes a form of stress release for me. So like when I would be busy with like my job and stressed out, like I remember one day coming home from work and just feeling pissed. Like this was a few years ago. After I'd started streaming, like all the Resident Evils were still pretty new to me. Like I'd only played like a couple of them. I hadn't played 5, and well, 5 is definitely not what I'm going to say is scary the first time through, and when you're a baby with horror games, it can be a little more like what the fuck is happening? And I remember coming home and I had just been like, ugh, I didn't want to. And then I was like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm jumping on Twitch. I'm gonna stream some. And by the end of it, I felt better. It was like for me, it's the immersion of horror and the intensity helps get me out of my own head, which is
mm,
something that I can get really good at getting wrapped up in my own head. So something that is immersive, but also, you know, occupies the brain so that my brain doesn't have time to wander into other areas and get confused or hung up on anything. To me, that's helpful, especially because then my secondary reaction after I freak out is usually to start laughing. And so it's like the perfect therapy recipe for me. Almost. But so for me, horror games, it's a lot of combination, but I will say the games I get the most discouraged by are ones that maybe spend more time almost I would say their pacing is not there. Like they spend almost too much time on world building
mm,
or, the wander around, figure out what's going on. I like the tension in horror games, and I think tension is something that when it's done well in horror can make those moments where they're more expositionary or more world building more effective. Um and also because for me, I'm like, you can build a lot of world just through atmosphere. I mean, I say Resident Evil was my very first horror game. I will say before I played Resident Evil, I played like 10 minutes of the original Silent Hill and got so freaked out I didn't touch it again for many, many years. But just those first 10 minutes, and I mean, if you've seen the first of the Silent Hill movies, you know that they replicate those that portion of the film where she's in the alleyway and she comes up on the body. They replicate that in the film too, which I was so thrilled at. But to me, what was so effective was you didn't have to spend a lot of time on what is Silent Hill for
mm.
those 10 minutes to be immensely effective. So, because they built atmosphere. And I think
Yeah.
when you combine atmosphere with effective pacing, you can really get something very, very solid. So,
Yeah.
and I mean, that's part of what I've enjoyed with the Resident Evil games. I mean, are they scary to me now? A lot less. But, as a first timer and somebody who was really not familiar with horror, they were very effective because a lot of times, like the very first one, you get the atmosphere of this mysterious mansion. Oh, by the way, this thing grabbed you.
Mm.
So. But those are the big things. I still love world building and character development. I just will say that I find, and I think they're really important, like a game that lacks that to me, I get annoyed with just as much, like Five Nights at Freddy's.
Yeah.
The mechanic is simple, stupid simple and effective, but there's basically no character or world building.
Yeah.
It's just
Um,
it's reliant on a very simple mechanic, and that gets tiresome. It doesn't have replay value, if anything, is what I would say. The replay value of
well,
a horror game to me comes with building up an effective world and characters so that I want to go back.
so I will be fair to Five Nights at Freddy's
Hmm.
in that um the first one may not have had very much in the way of world building, other than like a few little things here or there that people have found.
Hmm.
Um, but as it's developed and as new ones have come out, they've added a lot more things to the point where I think they add too much, and a lot of things are contradictory to one another.
When you go so
Um,
far in, you forget that you're sort of retconning yourself.
yeah, but I don't like Scott Cawthon. Fuck that guy. He can go die in a fire.
Yeah.
So, but my contention with Five Nights at Freddy's is akin to what you're saying, in so far as it's a simple mechanic, which on the surface by itself is not necessarily a bad thing.
Hmm.
But the mechanic in that game is just somebody going up to you, right to your face, and going boo over and
Yeah.
over again, just boo.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of problems with that. I know I've told you this and others that we have as friends and stuff uh in our circles, that, and I'll tell the audience, y'all, speaking to the audience specifically now, y'all, if you are ever involved in horror or in a horror game or horror movie or whatever that is, to me, you get one jump scare, one singular. Then it's a scare, right?
Hmm.
If you place it really well, if you put it in a place where it's not like, not even the whole thing of like, oh, it's going to be a jump scare and then you turn around and it's like a cat and then the jump scare. No, 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 no. That's been played out. Don't do that.
Yeah.
Find a strong spot for your jump scare. If you do more than that, all you're doing is going up to the audience going boo in their face over and over again while saying, "Are you scared yet? Boo. Are you scared yet? Boo."
Yeah. And I
It's
will
not
agree.
effective.
I was gonna
It's
say,
annoying.
and I will agree with that. And I have to admit, like thinking on it now, like now that because I mean, the other day I gave Escape the Back Rooms a try.
Hmm.
Escape the Back Rooms is a little bit of that. Like, I get it. They want something really eerie and it's puzzle solving essentially because you're trying to figure out where to go. But these guys can also show up. But after a while, it was a little bit like every time this thing catches me, it's the same thing and it's freaky and it's a little bit this, but now I'm getting a little tired of it. And again, partly because I feel like there's no investment in the characters
Hmm.
too. There's no investment in the characters or what it is. It just starts out. Now, it's something that was playing by myself. It's also a game that probably is a lot more fun actually being done in co-op. And I will admit that sometimes it's, if it doesn't work, it might be that it's like, oh, this is works better if you're in co-op mode or something, certain things. But there's certainly some that one puzzle in Escape the Back Rooms that was like easier to solve if you had somebody else playing with you. Otherwise, you had to run really fast. But I would say, like thinking of an example of like a really effective use of jump scares. Resident Evil 7.
Hmm.
Love it or, in that game, we know has kind of revitalized the old school horror crowd because that game really took Resident Evil back from the sci-fi action that especially in 6 it's really moving towards. So it kind of pulled it back from that and went, let's really immerse the viewers again in this horror. We're going to go back to the woods. We're going to go back to a mysterious huge ass home in the woods. So some very similar elements to the very first game, but then let's throw in the component of this is now going to be first person and we're going to really, we're bringing in a whole new character the audience doesn't know, and give just enough context to the audience is in the dark as he is. And in that way, it works. I still have my opinions about using FP first person. In horror, it's not a format I really like. And that's probably its own topic of like why I don't really think Ethan is that great of a character. Even though I like objectively, I don't like him that much as a character. For what he is in the game, he definitely works and he is effective. I just don't think he's as. I have my issues. I
Yeah.
have my issues. You've heard most of my issues with Ethan. But like that all aside, you mentioned jump scares, and I always think to the first time I was playing Resident Evil 7, and there's a lot of moments where I would like run around a corner and be like, what the fuck? And just run away, because that happens to me a lot. Like I'll just get in a moment and I'll miss something. There's this clip I found from like the first time I was playing where I was like wandering around and I'm like wandering through the main hall of house and I turn and I'm like, well, I'm gonna go walk up the stairs. And in the video you can hear me going, and I'm gonna go up the stairs, and then suddenly there's that big like mold creature there, and I'm like, oh fuck, nope, 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 as I turn and run away from it.
Yeah.
But what I always think of for jump scares, the garage fight with Mr. Baker. I can't remember his name.
Jack.
Jack Baker. Jack Baker. The fight in the garage. Right after you finally finish that fight, which in itself is a very well placed fight because they basically said instead of giving you this big open ass area for a boss fight, we're sticking you in somebody's garage. We're sticking you in like maybe in what is effectively a large single car garage, which is so different, I think, to so many horror games, and also like especially in Resident Evil, where boss fights tend to be in big ass open areas. The game instead put it in a you don't have much place to go. But
Yeah.
right when you think the fight's done and you go to the ladder and you go to climb up, and as soon as you go to the ladder and suddenly Jack's hand grabs you, turns you around to face you, and he throws you. And I always think back to that because that freaked me the fuck out so much the first time I had that encounter. And I mean, I remember it very clearly because it was 2020. It was during lockdown and COVID. I was sharing an apartment with another guy, but he'd pretty much gone and was living with his girlfriend during lockdown because I was an introvert and wasn't about to sit there and play his social life. So bless, he was a nice enough guy, but very extrovert, and I was very introvert. I was completely comfortable. But I remember when that scare happened thinking that, oh God, if some neighbor just walked by outside, they literally just heard me almost genuinely scream because I decided to be more relaxed about my volume during COVID
Mm.
because no one else was in the apartment.
Yeah.
But that scare always stands out to me as being like the singular jump scare that's well used in it. And maybe I'm forgetting some other ones, but that one has always stood out to me as like the one that takes the cake in that game. And then any of the other scares and surprises in it, to me, like they're still scares, and for me, it doesn't always take much to startle me. So, lots of things can be jump scares when I'm playing a game,
Yeah.
including me walking into, grenades. So we know I've done that. But
Lots of times.
it was a good use. I thought that was a well-placed one though, because it really gets you as the audience right when you finally are starting to relax. Like you've just gotten through this fight. It's intense. It's crazy, but it's finally like, okay, we did it. Like for all intents and purposes and experience with games you have, you're like, the boss fight is over. I get the moment of reprieve. I'm going to climb this ladder, go to the next area, and then kind of things go back to the status quo. And then they throw that shit at you,
Mm.
and I thought that was great. Again, we're not going to go into my thoughts on first person, but it was effective in that it used because it was a first person perspective. It did make it very effective in a way that it probably would not have been in over the shoulder in a third person. But yeah, it's a lot of it comes to atmosphere for me, and using atmosphere well to help advance things. Like,
Yeah.
You can create a game that's visually atmospheric, but like like sound design is something for me in horror games that I've come to notice stands out to me a lot. And when you use sound design well, you do so much for the audience without even having to necessarily throw a ton of action in there. So,
Yeah, and I'd very much agree with that. You know, for me, a lot of important stuff involved with horror and whatnot is the atmosphere. It sets a tone, you know,
mhm,
whether and not just like with the visuals, right? It's the audio.
yeah.
Um, one of the most important things, in fact, in my opinion, is audio.
Yes.
Uh, and and given the fact that I am a the kind of a audio play nerd, um, and I love me some good audio horror.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah.
whenever I'm playing a game, one of the things that I pay attention to is the audio. And if it's something that can make me like get scared to all hell because I hear a sound that's otherwise innocuous, like it's just like maybe a cup dropping or something like that, and I just like freeze and go, "Oh no, what am I gonna do?" Like that's good. That's
Yeah,
really good sound design.
it
One of my
is.
favorites One of my favorite tricks of all time with sound, though, is the moment that you realize there is no sound.
Oh, yeah, when you get that sort of almost it's like the same kind of silence that you get, like, e example from life was I used to work a dog daycare job where I would go into work and I would get there at about 5 between 5:30, 5:50, especially when I started going in just at 5:30 because it was frankly, traffic was better, but it meant I was leaving the house at, like, 5 AM. And there were some mornings where I stepped outside where it was just eerie how quiet it was. Like there was no wind, this was in a relatively suburban area, so there was no like traffic horns, it was just standing in the street, no wind, no fog, no clouds. The sky, you don't even see stars. The sky just looks like black, empty. And that was eerie. The other one that was eerie was when I'd step outside and it was all of that, except that you had this cold wind that really actually whistled.
Mhm.
That was also scary. But like it was almost the really still mornings were weird. Like you were sort of waiting for something to just go fucking wrong.
Yeah,
Like what's gonna blow up or run and jump out at me while I'm out here?
yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
see, it's very funny. We both have similar opinions on a lot of things like that. But then when you get to talking about games, some of our thoughts kind of split. And
Hmm.
I'll give you an example. You are you lose your mind when it comes to Outlast, as you said.
Yeah, I did.
For
It
me,
took me like 3 years to actually finish that game.
for me, it's a game that comes off as somebody going up to you and going boo in your face over and over again. It doesn't work for me,
Yeah,
but it works for you,
it work
right?
it works to an extent, but it's funny because you mentioned that and I enjoy it, but I almost had to become a little more conditioned before I could actually go through it and not totally freak out the entire time. But I think it's where it's not my favorite game. Um, and part of that, what I would say is I don't, this is where it's important, where building and story still matter to me because it lacked that. I honestly, it was kind of I don't really understand what's going on here and I don't get it. Like this guy's a journalist, then he went into this building and now everything's trying to murder him and he can't leave, but why did he go in the first place? Like,
Yeah.
it's sort of where I hit a side of it where I'm like in terms of those, like would I go back to that game? I mean, if I went back and played it, I'd probably still freak out a lot and jump around and run away from things because that just happens. But like, whereas like frankly, to use an example that, some people will say isn't horror at all or is barely horror anymore, Resident Evil 6 to me, especially Leon's campaign, to me harkens back to its more horror roots, given that you get the Tall Oaks scenario and the zombies. So it harkens back to a little more classic Resident Evil in that specific campaign. That to me has way more replay value because
Mhm.
the character is interesting. There's a story going on here. It's not just, you know, some guy with poor survival instincts going into a place that clearly screamed murder will happen here. you know,
Yeah.
the horror movie of don't go in there, you dumbass.
Yeah.
so, you know, which is actually something I would say it's an element you see two different sides of it in horror. You see some horror games, and this is something that I actually think is really important in horror is how the game starts. If you
Mhm.
can have a really good horror game, but if you don't start off the player on the right foot, you can fucking lose them so fast. Example from me, and you saw this, Dying Light. It shows up on a lot of lists as an excellent horror game, and I got bored. I got absolutely bored because it was like this huge ass tutorial that took like over an hour to do or something.
Over
It
an
was
hour?
well, it's because they try to blend the tutorial in with the whole because I didn't realize Dying Light had this whole element of you're going to use parkour and like street running all in this, which to me is a fascinating element to add to a character. Um, Even if you weren't like to me, I'd almost be curious to say, hey, let's use this element, but instead of a weapon, you're just giving the player more components of how they can run and hide. Like I'd almost be more fascinated if you didn't have the ability to also fight back. It was
Yeah.
just you have more ability to run and hide and get away from things. How do you use that? But it's the opening, the very, very beginning of the game where you go to drop into the city and you get to the ground and shit starts to go wrong. That was when I thought, okay, this is going to be the moment where I'm now survival horror. This is like, there's dead things running around. I thought that was going to be the moment. And then instead it ended up being like, nope, cutscene. You wake up inside this apartment building that's a safe place. And now we're going to have you do a whole bunch of series of missions, or we're going to have you do a few missions in this apartment building that are basically to teach you the game mechanics before you actually leave here. And I remember
Oh.
spending like a 2-hour stream on that, and I uninstalled the game afterwards. I was annoyed. I'm like, this is a waste of my time. There's no investment. I'm not invested in this character. And I'm not invested in this world or environment because you just did the thing that doesn't work for horror, which is you set me up too well. Whereas to me, like, you know, frankly, Resident Evil is excellent at just throwing you in. And they might have a few times where they'll have you go through an element that is a little more like, you know, okay, expositionary, like again, using Resident Evil 6 as an example. And I use it as an example because it's one of the Resident Evil games that I would say is probably one of the less popular of the more recent main chapter games in terms of as it's not as popular as a horror game. Leon's campaign, I'd say, is the most akin to horror, but part of it's because it has many more of the classic horror elements. And even though like the first part of that campaign, that very first chapter is, until you really start going through the university, there's that whole first part where like after you shoot the president, you're going through the university and nothing's jumped out at you yet. But I think that's more effective because they're having you go through the environment and it's just enough mobility within the environment, but also setting you up for the context because because that chapter in and of itself doesn't open with something that gives you a lot of context. It literally opens with you shooting the president who's turned into a zombie. So it's like, okay, we need a little bit of context, but keep us moving. And I think that's something Resident Evil does really well, which is they don't waste your time at the beginning. They give you enough to give you a foundation, and then they just throw you in and say, figure it the fuck out.
Yeah.
And to me, that is better horror because it's more realistic,
Mhm.
you know, to me. Whereas to me, it was a missed opportunity in Dying Light where I'm like, it loses me. Like, I shouldn't spend 2 hours before I get somewhere in a game. And I've noticed that's a big thing for me with a horror game, especially since my streams are usually 2 hours. If I'm starting a new game and in 2 hours I'm not that interested, then it's going to be hard to keep me interested.
Yeah.
So, which I think that's where it becomes a balance of atmosphere and world building. Another one, and you know how I feel about this one, Dave, is Evil Within does the same really well, where they just
Yeah.
fucking throw you in, but they throw you in everywhere all the time to the point that I remember the first time I played it being like, I don't know what the fuck is going on or how I got here or where here is, but I'm confused and I'm falling and I hit something sideways and oh god, something's trying to murder me. But I love it. I think it's brilliant. Like,
Mhm.
confuse the player. Leave them wondering.
I dig that.
Yeah.
Um,
So, and a lot of that's in your setup.
yeah. Yeah, for sure. Just like I think any medium, that setup, that opening is the most important because it sets the tone, it sets the pace, it sets expectations.
It's essential to
Um,
good narrative. I mean, it's the whole thing. It's the work that I'm doing right now where we're working with, other field, like the work I'm doing, working with specialists and with other fields where we're trying to help these people be better communicators by using a narrative structure. And so much of a narrative structure and communication, you know, you can bring up whatever the but is, whatever the conflict is or the challenge is, but if you don't set up your audience for that challenge, there's no investment in it,
yeah.
and I think that to me is hugely important. And you don't have to spend a lot of time explaining to have a good setup. Silent Hill is another of the very, very first original Silent Hill, which when you consider how old that game is anyways, is excellent. Because those first 10 minutes, you're walking. That's all you do. And it's just the way they used sound, the way they used the camera, actually. And I've never seen another game utilize camera in a game the way Silent Hill has, and yet it's so fucking effective.
Yeah.
Like,
They knew what they were doing.
yeah, but yeah, that's my thing with it is like I've played some of these games and they're fun, but I will admit that when it comes to replay value and the ones I genuinely like, I'm a little more similar to you in that it's like jump scares aren't enough to sustain a game. You've got to give me more. I've got to have more going on. So
Yeah.
we mentioned
Um,
sound design, and I was just thinking of Resident Evil 2 remake, and the what I think is great is the use of Mr. X and his footsteps
mhm.
in the RPD.
Yeah.
Like all the times I've hidden in a room, been like, he's nearby, I'm afraid.
That's funny. Mr. X,
I still love
guy
that
with
there's a
his
mod.
little hat.
I still love that there's a mod though where you can change his footsteps to like squeaky toys. So instead of that intimidating footsteps, you get every time he walks. I think in visual they actually have his feet become rubber ducks.
That's funny. I like that.
I think that brings us though to another element of horror that I think we both have a strong appreciation for is comedy, which I would basically summarize as camp.
Hmm.
Because I feel like when it comes to horror, comedy and camp are very much they're very interchangeable. Like camp is a very you see camp a lot in horror comedy.
Hmm. Hmm. I think that's a very interesting discussion to go down.
Yeah.
I think we can certainly spend a lot of time talking about that.
Hmm.
Um, but uh, yeah, I find myself when I think about uh what makes a good horror game, and one of the things that comes to mind is a game that I stopped playing called Perception.
Oh yes. I still have to play that.
And for those of you who don't know, Perception is a first person game and you are going to this like mansion house, whatever, but your character is blind, and your character sees, right, like quote unquote sees by echolocation. So if you want to find something, or if you're having issues trying to find something, you have to use echolocation. You have a cane, or I think a cane, and you tap it, and it sends out an echo, and the echo reveals like what an area looks like. Well, then there's bad guys, and the way they find you is by your echolocation. So there's a lot of like things going on. There's like story, you go into like other lives. I think like as memories or something.
Mhm.
But like it gets really weird. But the thing about it for me is like every sound in that matters because you cannot see, right? Especially when you know that there's an enemy lurking around, you can only hear. And it's risky to use your echolocation uh to find where to go. And there are parts where you're running because you have to run away. So you have to know the area. And like it was so much for me that I had to stop because I was like, I don't know if there's a bad guy around the corner. I'm really scared.
Oh my gosh. So this got to be too much for you.
Yeah, I had to stop.
Is this why you've been pushing me to play this to see how badly I just like totally lose it?
Well, yeah, admittedly so. But also, it's kind of what your channel is set up for,
It is, it
is
is.
these kinds of horror games.
Scare the shit out of myself.
So I think it would be something that you would find engaging
Mhm.
and enjoyable.
If
But
I'll probably wimp out so fast.
nah, you'll be fine. You'll be
It'll
fine.
be the total opposite. I'll just be like, yeah, this is no big.
It it could happen. You never know.
That would be really funny if that did, just because it would like solidify how opposite we are with horror sometimes.
Yeah. We'll have to report back when you play it to see if that is indeed the case.
Yeah.
Um but yeah, and that's not to say that it's like a bad game or anything. It's a really good game as far as I could tell, as far as I got.
Hmm.
Um but yeah, I just had to stop because it was too scary for me. I was like, I can't do it.
I mean, that's good
Um,
use of their mechanics, though, and setting up the world and things around you to create a very effective, you know, horror game. In
yeah,
essence, I mean, yet I almost have to commend games when they're so scary that it's difficult for people to get through them to an extent. Because again, Outlast took me 3 years, but I don't place a lot of replay value in Outlast, you know.
yeah,
And to me, that's the other side of horror is, and why jump scares are effective only so far. They're fun for me, but in replay value, they're only going to last so long because if you've replayed a game enough, I mean, it stops becoming a jump scare.
yeah,
You know it's
it,
going to happen. If you're like me, you start making dumb humor jokes about them instead and be like, hello there. You start.
yeah,
So, and that's an important aspect, but there's a balance, but too
yeah,
much for you though.
yeah. It
Oh
was.
my
It was
god.
one of those things that I'm just like, oh, can't do it.
Hmm.
Um,
Now we went into, I know I kind of brushed on it, but I'm kind of curious what your take is on it because I know you've heard some of mine, and I'll elaborate more on it. But camera in horror games, and again, and this is I think something that I really like about the horror genre is when it's done well in gaming, even in gaming, when horror is done well, it's because it utilizes all the tools in their they have at hand. And that isn't to say like, oh, they have like the top things because you see a fair number of indie games become successful horror games. I mean, probably one of the biggest examples is that Dead by Daylight really started as an indie game, you know.
yeah,
And they did something very, very effective. But I think partly because why you see indie games in horror be successful is because it's not that we have the fanciest graphic rendering or whatever. It's that it's more filmmaking. It's we use all the tools at hand. We utilize the camera, we utilize the audience perspective, we utilize the sound design, the color design even in a game, and that's why there are some elements in Outlast that are effective, like using light, using the fact that you can only see in the dark through the night vision portion of the camcorder, but the night vision distorts everything color wise and paints everything in a very unnatural color. So it's very weird. Like, those are all very effective uses of really what I would say tools that come straight out of filmmaking,
Hmm.
cinematography. But that comes back to like my other thing is the camera, because one thing I've noticed is a lot of horror games utilize first person.
Yeah.
And I'm curious. I'll wait to give my total details on that before, but I'm curious what your take is using it, because it's probably one of the most obvious cinematography choices, whether or not to have it be a third person or first person camera. And I'm curious what you think of that in horror.
What I think of like first person specifically, or just POVs.
The POV probably is a better way to put it, but especially since horror genre tends to favor first person.
So, okay, so here's my speculation. I think a lot of horror tends to use first person because it's first person. It's them trying to put the player more in sync with the character
Hmm.
and make it just that you are that person, right?
Yeah.
So
Do you feel like it works though? Like, is it a good horror tool? Because it certainly is a commonly used one.
I think it can, and this is where I will say yes sometimes. Um and here's what I mean. Um Pardon me. I got some coughs.
You're good. You're good.
With perception, um it's very, very effective as first person.
Hmm.
The
That makes
reason
sense.
is that they set it up very particularly, because it's kind of hard to have a third person game where the protagonist is blind and has to use echolocation, right?
Hmm.
It makes more sense to put that in the first person perspective.
Yeah. No, that makes
Um,
total sense too. I mean, it's almost
th-
essentially implied in the name.
yeah. Now, when it comes to something like, um, I'll pick on Resident Evil 7 and 8.
Yep.
When it comes to Ethan, and this is something where I think we could put a pin in this for later, but just to touch on it quickly, he's the blandest, most boring, generic
White bread.
human being.
He's white
He's
bread.
he's not even Wonder Bread.
No, he's just
Um,
white bread.
he is very boring,
Yes.
and he is first person. We don't know what he looks like. We never really find out.
Yeah.
Um,
Which takes me
and
to a beef that 8, when they had opportunity to actually show his face, they so deliberately avoided it to a point that I was like, guys, really? He's a whole
yeah,
character. Why don't we see his face?
I disagree with you. He's not a whole character.
Yeah. Well, they were trying to
He's
tell us he was a whole
dull.
character. They it was what gets me with that, and I agree with you completely, because what gets me is that on one hand they were trying to make him, make it very immersive, make it very like put the audience in the perspective of the character, kind of make him an everyman character. But then 8 had brought elements into the plot that were much more like, no, this is his daughter. Like, they brought in, I would say, more elements to try to say this is a fleshed out character. And to me, to make a character an attempt to convince the audience that you fleshed them out, but then avoid showing them the face because you want the audience to fill it in, to me is like now you've just given the audience mixed messages. Is this a
Yeah.
fleshed out, fully established character, for better or for worse? Or do you want the audience to impose themselves on this character so you're not showing us the face? You can't have it both ways.
I would say he is the most poorly designed Resident Evil character for the
Hmm.
reasons that you're expressing,
Yes.
right? Like there's nothing to him, and yet they want everything for him.
Yeah.
And because of that polarization, it ends up being nothing, and no one is satisfied.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree with that, and I feel like I ranted about it a lot when I was playing 7. Partly because I've never been overly fond of first person, but to me,
Mhm.
with only a few exceptions, I find that first person is a bit of a crutch. Um, and again, it's not to say that it can't be used effectively. Perception, like, you can't have a game titled Perception that's about a character that's blind, where you're going to have a whole mechanic centered around the fact that this character can't see normally and not use first person. I feel like that makes complete sense. That's effective use where it's also a part of the character, it's not just a consequence of the world.
Yeah.
Outlast, well, Outlast also, frankly, did use first person to their advantage, but it's because they didn't just use it as conventional first person. They 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 put rules in place with it. The whole like, you couldn't see everything really well. It got really dark, and so the only way you could see was with the camera, and the camera can run out of batteries. Like I'm like, for better or for worse, that was good use of first person to enhance the player's experience of it. But when I look at other games though, to me, the question I find myself wanting to ask is when I'm looking at games using first person is, well, am I supposed to put myself in the place of the character, or is this a fully formed character that I am experiencing this with, but I am not becoming the character essentially? And to me, it's the crutch of we want the player to be immersed, and yet I would say I've played, you know, I would say a lot of the horror games that I've played that I've enjoyed have been very immersive and haven't had to put me in the first person to feel immersed in it, because it's not, oh, I'm immersed because I am the character. It's I'm immersed because I'm invested in this, because the environment is immersive. The sound is immersive, the environment, all these things you use to create this environment around you and this atmosphere are immersive. And also it's immersive because I'm invested in this character's experience in the game. Sebastian in Evil Within, I think, especially the first one, is a really good example of it because that's all third person. Like it's the same perspective that you see in pretty much like all the Resident Evils. It's over the shoulder, it's this, but to me it's like, well, they don't ever have to show anything directly from his perspective. It's how they manipulate the camera, it's where they throw you, it's the fact that you know as much as he does,
Mhm.
and you're still invested in what's going on. You're also still highly confused.
Yeah.
So, and to me, that's it can become an excuse to not spend time on a character, is what gets me. And I think that's, back to the very beginning, what you were mentioning, that, you know, developing when you can really have a fully fleshed out, layered character in a horror game, it makes it that much of a richer experience.
Yeah.
Because then it feels like it's an
Um,
actual person.
yeah. And I think that there are many games that do that well.
Hmm.
I would say that a lot of first person, um, a lot of it works better when it's something that's more, because what we're talking about right now is horror that is meant to be more of a way to draw someone into the character.
Hmm.
Whereas horror games, where I think it works well because of what it is like Left 4 Dead, right?
Yeah.
Because Left 4 Dead is a horror game,
Hmm.
but it's a horror game that's kind of silly. It's kind of obvious. It's not trying to say something. It's not trying to like do something per se. It's just four random people get together. They're like, oh no, it's the zombie apocalypse. We got to get to wherever the exit is, the safe house. Uh, and we have weapons, and here come the zombies. Let's get them,
Hmm.
right?
It's strong emphasis
Um,
on survival over story because it's meant
yeah,
to be it's meant to be a group activity essentially. Like,
yeah.
I mean the games we've played, when it's capture the flag and this, it's meant to be like we're going to give you some fairly simple games when you boil them down, but we're going to throw you in an environment that's going to have some other elements to make your life difficult.
It's Shaun of the Dead, but you guys are playing the characters,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And in two, you can literally find a cricket bat, so you can actually live that life. Um,
Evil Dead
but
too, but you're Ash.
yeah, and even the ASIM Evil Dead, uh, you know the the protagonists like Ash and so forth,
Hmm.
um, are in third person, but the demon is first person unless you possess someone or something. In which
Yeah.
case, then you go into third person,
Yeah.
right?
Well, I mean, look at
Um,
Dead by Daylight, where if you play as a survivor, you're in third person. If you play as the killer, you're in first person.
yeah, and part of that I understand. Well, with one exception, and that's Chucky. But setting Chucky and Tiffany aside, um, the rest of the killers, part of the reason that it's in first person is so that way the field of view that you have is much different than the survivors.
It is. It
It it
is.
it gives the survivors a very big advantage to be able to see more of their environment, whereas as the killer, the idea is for you to focus on what you're seeing, kind of horse blinders,
Yeah.
if you will.
Well, it's a way to level the
Um,
playing field because the killers, because the survivors don't have any combat, because
they
there's
don't have,
no,
yeah,
yeah, it's pretty much run, hide, get away. And so
yeah,
it's a way to make sure you create a more equal playing field. It's why I have trouble playing as killer. I am not a good killer when I play PvD because with the field of vision, I am just all over the place. And half the time I'm like, I have no idea where the fuck anybody is. Whereas when I'm Survivor, I'm really good at playing. I feel like I'm really good at Survivor. That's because a lot of times I'm circling that camera. I am
yeah,
watching everything.
yeah,
And that's an advantage as a survivor. It doesn't always work in your favor. The killer can still sneak up on you, but it does a lot to not overweight any one side against the other,
yeah.
you know,
Um,
because seasoned killers will still take you the fuck out.
if they can find you, which
Yeah. The
a
really
lot of them are
seasoned
really
ones
good
are
at that.
good. Yeah, the seasoned killers are pretty good despite that.
I will say when I'm playing Survivor, I know what the killer's view is. I know what it looks like. And so there are times where like you can kind of squirrel yourself away in positions that look like you should be found, but aren't. Like
You
I even have for the startup of a stream, if I'm playing DVD, one of the clips that I use is when the alien chapter dropped and I'm playing as Ellen, and she's in her Alien Resurrection look, and we're on Auto Haven Wreckers, which
Mm-hmm.
um, there's a lot of like rusty walls that have like cars and stuff on them,
Yep.
and so the alien is running around. She turns around because it's the Queen Alien model. She turns around and it looks like she's looking at me for a moment, and then like she just like doesn't see me for like 6 or 7 seconds.
Yep.
And all I'm saying is, I
I am
am
junk.
junk. I am junk.
I
I
am
am junk.
junk.
She goes away. And
I
like,
am
I just
junk.
sprint away. I'm like, yay, I'm junk.
Let's go.
That's
You know,
I had a similar one. There's a clip I have from playing their mutual friend Chaos, and I ran. We were in like that cabin setting that's like in the woods, and you got the old boats in
Mhm.
the cabin and whatnot. But the killer was Freddy. And
Yeah.
in the video, you could see very clearly. I go and I thought I was gonna die. It was one of those moments where I'm like, oh, I'm sure I see the red. I see the red glow. Freddy spotted me. I don't know what to do. I'm shoving myself in this locker, even though he's probably gonna open it. And then in the video, he runs right past the locker twice. and then just
Yep.
keeps going. And I'm sitting there going, the fuck? I thought he saw me. That's also
I
why when I get knocked down, I usually try to hide in tall grass because I actually succeeded in hiding from a killer once because I got knocked down and they went away to knock down somebody else. So I pulled myself over to some tall grass around a box, and the
yeah,
killer was standing over me, like on top of me, and they couldn't find me. And I was just
that's
like,
fair.
this is great. I'm gonna run away from there. So yeah. Yeah, it is definitely like there are some really brilliant moments that can happen. By the way, shout out to Dead by Daylight being the game that like is the epitome of how to have almost like almost have conversations with complete strangers without ever talking to them actually, because the only way you're communicating is basically by either teabagging or pointing or waving.
Yep.
So I mean, I'm gonna sidetrack us here because this story just makes me so happy. Back when the Resident Evil chapter was in beta, and it's the only beta run I've done, and I loved it. Oh my gosh, that was so much fun. Also because it meant you got moments where like it was like Nemesis and four Leons that looked exactly the same. And we were at the ski lodge and we're running around and it looked like we were going to get away, like the three out of four of us were going to get away, but then and we were all like sort of standing in like like the doorway being like, come on, come on, come on, watching the other Leon. And so we're all sitting there just like squat, 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 and then we see Nemesis knock him down. And it was this little circling, and then suddenly the three of us, again, a bunch of Leons and one Nemesis. We all take off. We run towards the Nemesis. One starts healing, the other's running around. It turns into this absolute clusterfuck chaos of Leons running in circles around Nemesis, teabagging, trying to heal the other Leon, getting knocked down. So then I'm getting healed by another Leon. It's this, and it's just this weird chaos of Leons like swarming a Nemesis badly, but it worked. And all four of us got away.
That's
I was just
amazing.
like, and it was just utter chaos because it was just like, oh, run over. I'm healing him. Somebody else is running. The other two are trying to like distract him. And then he comes back and he knocks me down. But that other Leon is now back up on his feet. And so then he's trying to heal me. And then they're running around Nemesis. And then he's knocked down. And then they're running. It's just this. It was literally like, what the fuck remember getting to the end of that being like, the fuck just happened?
That's
I
pretty
don't know
funny.
who those people are, but if you're out there and you remember doing a match while Resident Evil Chapter was in beta in the snow with Nemesis, where this clusterfuck of Leons went crazy and our own Nemesis and somehow survived, please find me. That was a brilliant moment.
That's amazing. I
So,
love that.
yeah, but yeah, shout out to a game that can have moments like that, and you haven't actually said a single word to the other people involved. It's just silent body language with limited
Oh yeah.
signals.
Oh yeah.
So,
Some really good stuff in
yeah,
that game.
yeah,
Um, but yeah.
yeah,
So
man. Now, I was curious, I jotted down like one of our questions, I think way back when we were first brainstorming, like, what
mhm.
what does the void like? And by the void, my term for the outer world of like where I usually go when I'm trying to find something new to play sometimes is, what is everybody else recommending? Which I have feelings about what people consider the best horror games because some of them I'll be like, oh yeah, I played that, I loved it, but I'm looking for something new. And then I see other ones on the list and I'm like, really? That's on here? That's on here?
Yeah. I also have opinions.
It's
And
funny though because I see a lot of common. It's a lot of the same games showing up on everybody's lists, and it really makes me wonder that I see these same series of games show up when I'm sitting there going, "Well, those are good. Those why?"
yeah. I feel the same about a lot of games, not just in horror, but like any genre.
Yeah,
Um, there's just stuff that I'm like, how do people have that opinion?
yeah.
There's others I'm like, that's right.
Well, like we've touched on it here. Five Nights at Freddy's shows up on a lot of horror game lists, like top list. I also see it show up on a lot of people's personal lists. And on one hand, yes, but I guess that's part of me for me is what makes a good horror game. And I think this goes back to the question of what makes a good horror game is I need replay value.
Mhm.
If it's a one and done game, then I'm not going to rate it that high because to me, I want to go back and play the game again. And
Yeah.
I come back to it a lot, but it's what I like about Resident Evil because even if they're not as scary for me anymore, there's still a lot of replay value in them.
Yeah.
And
Oh
there's a way
yeah.
to make it intense by just trying to speed run and do crazy things like run through the game without saving.
Speaking of, uh, so Games Done Quick is doing a bunch of speedruns and stuff, right?
Hmm.
Last night they uploaded a twofer. One was and it's in the same video. So the
Okay.
second game is Silent Hill Shattered Memories.
Oh, okay.
The first one is the remake of Resident Evil.
Oh, the first one.
Yeah, playing
Oh,
as Jill in true survivor mode with the best ending. And he
oh.
does it in under an hour.
Okay, but is he using mods and like, 'cause
Nope.
there's a few, because so are you getting the full door opening, door closing animation?
No.
Okay, so he is using some, it's some mod for that because that's one of the things I've seen kind of some debate on because you can't skip that in the standard game.
Yeah.
But it
I
like
guess
there's
in
like
that,
there's a mod that allows that to be skipped, because it does cut some
yeah.
time off of that, but it's like just that.
Yeah, I guess in that sense, yes, they're using mods, but that's like the only one.
It's a
Um,
relatively small one that just, it's like skipping cutscenes.
yeah. Um, and I was watching it and I was very fascinated, especially by the fact that they do the stair slide. Uh,
Oh, like
and it's so basically
it's like where the character
there's
just kind of goes like the way they do it down the stairs, they just slide.
yeah, they literally like slide down the stairs with barely moving the model. Like the model itself does not do walking animation. They
Yeah,
just
I've seen that mod. I don't know what it is.
it's not a mod. It's a function of the game that they're able to
Oh.
like work with.
Oh, so like more like exploiting something. A little bit like the
Yeah.
yeah, well it's a little like OG4, the double speed glitch, I guess is what it is, kind of a glitch where you can double speed Leon. But you can
Yeah.
only do it once you've gotten Striker, the Striker
Uh,
shotgun, because that's the only way to that you have to use that one to activate it.
yeah.
But oh, weird. I didn't know
Yeah.
that was an
It,
in-game exploitation.
yeah. To the point where like before you start a game of that Resident Evil, you have to do a thing where you showcase like what your controller is doing. So that way people aren't like making a program that like auto slides them.
Yeah, you have to
Um
it requires manual input to activate.
yeah. And in order to like save on the wrist, they have a way where you can like set it up where you just like rotate the one of the analog sticks and it does it
Oh,
instead.
weird.
Yeah.
Weird. Oh my gosh. That's crazy
But
though. That is a game that is definitely not the easiest to speedrun, but less, I would say, because of the actual play style and more because you really have to know where to go next to
yeah.
maximize it because there's so much back and forth otherwise.
And admittedly, he said that he has over 3,000 hours of playing that game,
That'll do
but
it.
he makes it look so easy. It's wild.
Dude. Oh man. That's crazy. I'll have to check that out. That's crazy. Yeah. That is definitely. Well, it's like the first time I watched a speed run at all of 2 remake and first of all, I'm so used to doing completionist runs. Welcome to me. I grew up playing Final Fantasy games, so my brain is always on how to do everything. It's the
Yeah.
first time I saw the speed run, my brain's going, "You're skipping so much stuff." But then it was like, "Okay, but I get it. But you're skipping all this stuff." So, but yeah, yeah. And then it goes back to though, again, replay value.
Mhm.
A good horror game to me has to have replay value. The same way a good horror movie is one that you want to go back and watch.
Yeah.
Like a truly good horror movie to me is one that I will gladly watch again and again. OG Halloween, good replay value or rerun value, I guess. Halloween 2018, same deal. Has great rewatch value, you
Yep.
know. You know,
Um,
whereas like to me like Rob Zombie Halloween, not as much really no rewatch value to me. It's like a more explicit graphic version of the first one, and the first one was way more effective without having to be exploitive.
it's Rob Zombie hillbillies and then Mike Myers.
Yes,
Um,
exactly. It's a very Rob Zombie film.
yeah.
But
But we can get into that
it's
later.
a whole
Put
different
a
thing.
pen in put a pen in that. Yeah. Um,
Or a
but
knife
yeah, like
in it.
or a knife. Yeah. Got it right next to the guy with the glasses. But yeah, I think a lot of replay value is very important for horror games.
Yeah. I think that's where it goes back to what you've said about jump scares being kind of a one and done. If you're totally dependent on your game utilizing jump scares, then you're going to start to lose replay value because you're dependent on one element. So, you almost have to accept if you're making a horror. I feel like if you want to make a good horror game, one of the things you have to first come to terms with is that if you want it to have replay value, eventually it's not going to be scary to your viewers because in essence, I would say fear is not going to be the reason they keep coming back to it. It has to also be a good game.
Yeah. Otherwise, it turns into like when you go to see a either like starting or bad comedian, or when you go and you see a pro wrestler who's trying to get cheap heat, the way that they'll do that, well, one of the ways is they'll note what city they're in. They'll look up something that everybody in that city knows and either cheers or boos, and then they'll mention it in their set.
Yeah.
And people will cheer or boo because
Well,
that's what they do.
well, it's the stupid
It's
Jake Paul fighting Mike Tyson match that happened the other day, which I will say it was sort of hilarious how much the internet invested itself in it because I was happily watching Stargate SG-1. I was completely content. I didn't have to deal with my streaming service crashing because I was on Amazon Prime watching SG-1 going, this is way more fun. And then I'm seeing everybody else going that going, why the fuck did everybody else No offense if you watched it and if you had fun, but I got more than I needed. Also, I have very strong opinions about Jake Paul and the fact and that person. I have very strong opinions. They are probably
I
being implied. I do not need to utter them. I think we have very similar opinions on that
well,
individual.
I will.
Oh, you'll express them.
I I have no patience or time for a scammer or a convicted rapist. So
Yeah,
who
I
cares?
I have strong opinions that boil down to why the fuck would I waste my time?
Exactly.
But I've noticed that's one thing he does is he will, he does that same thing. Let me pick something big and controversial that people either are going to love or going to hate. It's his gimmick.
Yeah.
And
Just
it's just that. It's a gimmick.
yeah. I
So
don't know. I don't want to spend too much time on
no,
that
no, like
because
I was
they
just adding a
suck.
real world
Um,
illustration of that since
but
that was a
yeah,
very relevant thing that just happened. I said I had a
yeah.
really fun time watching SG-1 that night.
Awesome.
It was very nice.
What was I doing? I think I was playing Blasphemous too. It was either that or I was playing Balatro,
Oh,
which
nice.
is addict. Don't play Balatro. It's addictive.
Okay.
Like you will hate yourself.
Yeah.
Um,
For sure, for
that
sure.
that's a good game. Just don't do it.
Yeah. So now, like, coming back to horror games, though. Okay, let's start with a hypothetical, though. Like, okay, say we're gonna make a horror game, which, by the way, that would actually be kind of a fun exercise. But let's do like a little fun, little like thing. So, if we were gonna make a horror game,
Mhm.
what is the first thing you would focus on? Or let's design this together, even if we don't actually come up with a plot. Like, what's the first thing we focus on?
That's a good question, and I'm glad you asked it. Um, I would say, okay, let's sit down
Hmm.
and let's talk about kind of a general what do we want, right? Like what kind of story do we want to tell?
So starting from
And
story and character, maybe.
a little bit of that, yeah. Um, and then figuring out like, okay, well, what kind of genre of game? Not in terms of like horror or whatever, but more like fighting, action, adventure,
Yeah.
um,
Well, because you do get
platformer.
like, yeah, the style gaming, kind of more the gaming style, and then, that genre, yeah.
Yeah. And then we would probably go about figuring out um creating like a lookbook or something of that nature, and to kind of like be a brief quick pitch to people that we want on the development team.
Hmm.
And then I think that the next step would be to design a game design document.
Mm,
uh Design the game design document, which includes things like um the HUD, you know, types of levels that we're going to see, um, characters that are important, mechanics that we're going to run into, things like that, right?
yeah.
Like from the sound effects and music that we're expecting all the way up through there. And game design docs, of course, are living documents, so things will
Yeah.
change as stuff gets added or removed.
Well, it's like
And
a
then,
business's brand guide.
yeah, more or less.
Hmm.
So it would be coming up with a design doc and then just kind of going from there, figuring out the budget, figuring out how to get money
Hmm.
to pay for all this. Um, what are our limitations? What engine are we using? Which also kind of depends on like what the genre of game is going to be.
Hmm.
Um, a- and then just kind of like going from there, eventually getting to like pre-alpha testing and all that, which is whatever that would be, QA, all that stuff. And then looking at things like, okay, how are we going to sell this game?
Yeah.
And right now, I think the best way would be to go through Steam.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, I think it's safe to ignore something like Epic, as
Epic
far
hit
as
or
like,
miss. I think Steam is the most effective, diverse platform. Mm.
yeah. And on top of that, they have certain agreements where you can request a bunch of Steam keys, right? And you can get those keys and you can put them on Humble Bundle or other places like that, right?
Yeah.
And the only thing that Steam asks is that you do not set the prices at those places as cheaper than Steam.
Yeah. It's
And
basically you can
because,
sell this over here too. You just can't undercut our sales.
and here's the thing, Humble Bundle and some places like, but specifically Humble Bundle, they don't really take much of a cut that Steam takes.
Yeah.
So you're selling the same price, but you're getting more of that because of Humble Bundle.
Yeah.
Um, Another thing that would be doable is, let's say that the game is pretty much already done. You've got a lot of things like lined up as far as like cost and whatnot. You put it on a Kickstarter and you set it for like $5,000.
Yeah.
And the reason is that the money that you set does not matter. What matters is that it breaks through that barrier of $5,000 in 24 hours.
Yeah.
And when people see that, news picks up on it, news talks about it.
Yeah.
And so you start getting out there, people start looking at you, and people start talking about you and thinking about your game. But you've already got it pretty much already done and funded in the can.
Yeah. It's
Um,
more like revert. It's almost taking instead of let's fund this so we can do it. It's we've already done this, but this funding is more an investment in getting our name out there and getting the word out there. And by the way, it probably supplements some of the expense if this does end up being a total bust.
And then what I would do is, because you can set prices by region
Mm-hmm.
in Steam. So I would look at the cost of dollar value. So like say the dollar to the Spanish peso or
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah.
right? Like the
So
euro,
you'd
the dollar
adjust
to the
prices
euro.
for market, basically,
Yeah,
regional
because
markets.
there are some places that have a gaming community, but those places are not as well to do. And so in order to get your game to sell there, you have to consider the cost of living there.
Yeah.
Uh, and when people are considering that they make like, I don't know, $100 per month, and that has to feed their family and house and all that stuff, they can't really, like, there's no real choice between that or a game.
Yeah.
And situations like that can also lead to things like piracy, right?
Yeah.
Which piracy, whatever, I don't care.
Yeah.
But in terms of this, if we're trying to sell our game, it's important to look at the cost of living in places.
Yeah.
And then you set it individually in Steam for whatever would make most sense.
Mm-hmm.
And people will come in droves and they will be very supportive of your company and the product.
Yeah. You want regional accessibility for a game.
Yep.
Now, going back to the horror game though specifically, so now we've gone like off into game marketing.
Sorry.
Yeah,
I think about this a lot.
I noticed
I'm
that.
sorry.
I was like, gonna jump
Um,
back to horror games real quick though, because I think you touched on something at the beginning that I really would say I resonate with, because it's where I start with any kind of storytelling. Is if you want to make a good horror game, you first need a good story.
yeah.
And I think we've kind of established two big things is we want the world, we want the story, the world, the lore, essentially to make sense and to work. Um, you don't need all of it for the narrative, which to me I think is the thing that gets missed in a lot of storytelling is when are you saying too much or when are you not saying enough? And I think that's a line that we see a lot of games get wrong because they either go one direction or the other direction. They do too much world building, or they don't do enough, or they don't do enough organically, because that's the other side of it is do you, I'm going to use this as an example again, Evil Within.
Mhm.
There is not a lot. Evil Within, I think, world builds in a good way. Now, part of it is because there is an element of you don't understand the world that you're in. You've got some basic rules, obviously, and then like don't get killed by these guys. But you're not, but I think they do a good job in kind of the key points, Ruvik's research, that you unravel those sort of naturally through the story, enough to unravel that. But on expanded lore is Sebastian's personal journals that you find throughout the game. Now, you could go through the entire game and skip those. And it's completely like there's no mana to it. You are just reading them. And it's not a bad thing, but it's a nice element of this is not, it enhances the character more and puts the character, gives you a more human character that enriches, especially moments like some of his conversations with Joseph and kind of understanding that this is a character who, has gone through a lot of traumatic change in his life. But it's not absolutely essential. And so those journals are more optional reads. You don't have to stop and read all of them. In fact, I would say a lot of the written um, exposition, so all the stuff that you stop and read, the documents you find, a lot of that you could get by in the game without having to read it. Because the stuff that you really need is incorporated more organically and through more auditory channels. Like it stands out to me that like probably some of the most significant Ruvik development elements are done through his recordings. So instead of it be this audio channel you have to look, you can play it. And so as a player, you can listen, but you can still go around and do other things within that space. So it's kind of an element of We want you to, it's almost like the game is saying, we want you to actually get this information because it's a little more helpful for this character, but we're not going to occupy brain space by making you stop and read it.
Mhm.
And so in that regard, it becomes a little more organic. But to me, it's a good balance of you don't need all of it. Like, we don't need it enhances the experience, but it's not all essential to the experience. You know,
Mhm.
is it more helpful once we get to the second game? Yes, but we're going to leave that out for now because that's the second game. That's a whole other conversation. We are definitely going to be having a whole conversation about Evil Within 1 and 2. That's a whole
Yeah.
different thing. But it's something that I think games walk a line in, and I think, any writers, authors, and filmmakers out there will tell you, I know, Dave, you've experienced this from writing and filmmaking, and I experience it, is world building doesn't necessarily mean that everything you come up with goes into the story or goes into the core narrative. A
Yeah.
lot of world building can just be that. It's world building that, if anything, as the creator, as you develop, helps you set up what the rules are for the world. And I think that's why it's a good horror game is going to sit there and say, what's our world? Let's build our world. Let's build our world. Let's find our singular narrative and our characters and dig into those, because I like a fully fleshed out character. I don't need them to be fleshed out 100% for me right from the get-go, but I like them but if you fully flesh them out and then use that organically with it to dictate how you make choices within your story, then your audience will get that. Your audience will get that the character is fully fleshed out. And again, I come back to Evil Within's example because I feel like Sebastian is I feel like a lot of the characters in there are actually really well fleshed out, considering you don't spend a lot of time sitting there talking to the characters.
Mhm.
I mean, I feel like a lot of the times when Sebastian's talking, it's more just like him going, "What the fuck?"
Yeah.
But you still come out the end of the game being like, no, we had a character. We had a person in there. And I think that's an important part of it that is easy to overlook, especially if you're just thinking of horror in terms of, you know, the Five Nights at Freddy's mechanic. Is the horror just going to be, here's an environment and we're going to make the environment do this to scare the audience while they try to get out of this scenario? And again, it can be effective for immediate scares, kind of a party scare. But again, if you want replay value, then you gotta make characters.
Yeah.
So, the characters and world building are kind of like characters, singular narrative, world building. And then, yeah, I'd be with you, like expanding it out from there of, okay, now that we've got the world building, you know, and again, it's a big thing for me, but pacing is such a thing
Mhm.
within a world. Like,
Yep.
horror is something that's so hit or miss with pacing.
Yeah. And even people who are more well known in horror, uh, some of whom I don't like Eli Roth,
Mm-hmm.
they don't know how to do pacing no matter how many years of experience they have.
Remind me which games were his. I'm having a moment of blank.
I don't think he's done any games. He's done
Or,
movies
oh, which films?
like Hostel.
Oh, okay, okay. I
Yeah,
haven't actually
that
seen
guy.
that, but okay, but I know who you're talking about now.
You're
Yeah.
missing nothing. You are missing nothing. Fine.
Good to know.
Yeah. No. But some people who've had experience for years upon years, whatever medium it is, they may never understand pacing. They may never get pacing.
Hmm.
Whereas others, they might get it immediately. They might just be like immediately clucked into it,
Yeah.
and they just get it, you know. Um, but for like most people, it just kind of takes some time, some practice, and they just kind of understand it after a
Hmm.
while, you
Yeah.
know. Um, and it's funny because audiences notice these things even when one of the things that I hate hearing, I hate it so much, is people won't notice that.
Oh my
No,
gosh.
no.
Ugh.
You immediately you are wrong if you say that
Exactly.
line.
Someone's gonna notice it and they're gonna, I want to sit there and be like, have you not paid attention to the age of the internet? There are going to be entire boards dedicated to that.
And even if the average person doesn't specifically notice the thing that is wrong and can point to it, they may not notice it, but their brain did.
Yeah.
And because their brain did, they go, huh, that's odd. I don't know what's going on here, but I don't like it. And then you're done at that
Yeah.
point. Like
Yeah.
it's over.
That's kind of how I feel like it feels playing Dying Light, the beginning of Dying Light, is it kind of feels like they got really invested in something and went, well, we're going to be spending a lot of time in this area, but it's okay because people like the mechanic. They're not going to notice they're spending it. Oh, I fucking noticed.
Hmm.
I fucking noticed and I installed the game afterwards. Because I was like, I'm done wasting my time with this. I'm not, throw me the fuck in
Yeah.
the deep end and let me figure it out.
Yeah.
You know,
You know,
I'll figure out
or
the
it could
mechanics
be,
still.
yeah.
I would
Or it
love,
could be a case of like having a creeping death kind of vibe where the horror comes slow and is unstoppable, and you're on this track and there's no way off of it, no matter what teases come that give you the temptation to be able to, or whatever.
yeah.
Right?
Well, a
Those could
little
be
bit.
fantastic.
Well, like a surprise for me has been Darkwood. Like, I'm not going to say Darkwood is the best game out there, but I've actually been pleasantly surprised that Darkwood, for being, and again, it's not got the same. It's it holds a more of an interest kind of. It's not. It's like a few steps beyond like Terraria, where I'm like Terraria is truly open world to me. Is very,
Yeah.
very open world. I mean, I am not doing anything plot related in Terraria, and there's not much that's plot related. But Darkwood is like some steps beyond it where there is a plot, there's mystery, but there's a lot of open-endedness. But there's this regular thing of if you're not back in a safe house by nightfall, you're gonna die. And it becomes this sort of looming intensity to make it a step further because it's the big bad at the end of the hallway, but the big bad's not running at you. You're moving at the same pace every single time. Time is moving at the same speed. But if you aren't efficient, if you aren't effective, if you get stuck, you don't plan right, then time catches up with you. And suddenly you're out in the woods getting killed by some weird monster at night and you can't do a damn thing about it. And and because you saw, I was really skeptical at first when I did Darkwood because I'm like, is this? But I'm like, but it's intriguing. And it makes me want to do more because as I can get further and unwrap more, I see more within the world,
Yeah.
you know, because really that's the overarching thing is, oh, guess what? When night falls, you fucked.
Yeah. It As I've seen you play that game, it reminds me of a game that's not a horror game, The Long Dark.
Mm,
Are you familiar with The Long Dark?
I am not.
So it's essentially a survivalist simulation game
Okay.
where you are lost somewhere in Canada and it is winter. It is cold. And the objective, uh, ostensibly for like the core game, but there's like other modes and stuff. The idea is to survive as long as you can by traveling places, looting things like cars, um, finding like places you can huddle up in,
Hmm.
cabins or warehouses or a lighthouse or something like that, and avoiding the cold,
Hmm.
avoiding creatures like wolves and cougars, uh, hunting,
Yeah.
fishing, all that stuff. And it's really fascinating. It's very simple in on the surface, but as you play, you kind of like get deeper into it. And you're like, oh man, how long can I go? Because injury and sickness can happen. Like if you fall too far off of a mountain or like a hill or something, and you hit wrong, like that's an injury. That's hard to deal with. That
Yeah.
could just mean that your run is ruined.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, you also have to like do things like barricade and stuff like that. And be aware of like sounds and whatnot. Um, and if you stay in a place too long, there's like certain animal. I think it's the cougar who will start coming into that area as its territory and will try to get you.
Yeah. And those
It's
are just,
wild.
and it's just world rules, like sort
Mhm.
of just environmental rules, which I love it when a game thinks about those elements and sets those up as rules because it's kind of like it's not a guarantee you're going to come up against every one of those elements, but the possibility is there depending on how you play the game,
Yeah,
and it's a factor.
yeah.
It's an element that I like, um, or that I think is really helpful in world building, which is if you start with the question, what if, and you just sit there and start thinking about what if all of these different things, what if this is the situation or what if this is the scenario. I'm going to use Walking Dead as an example because Walking Dead is basically a world where they go, what if zombies? But instead of spending all the time on the zombies, they really said, what if this world and zombies? And that's why, it's like, yeah, there's a lot of characters and explorations and different plot lines in this because it's basically saying we're going to create a context here and then just start speculating on
I
what makes
would
sense within
love,
it.
I would love for you to watch the Living Dead series, the series of movies. I should be clear.
Okay. I'm
Um,
vaguely
and
familiar
the
with it.
and I mean like from the black and white one all the way through.
Oh.
Uh, I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions on that, given what you've said just now about The Walking Dead.
Okay. Okay. I'll have to take a look at this.
And that'll be something that we put a pin in as well.
Yes. Put a pin in that one. And I can go into that one and even things of what ifs, like with Walking Dead, with Last of Us, which, by the way, though, let's take a moment to appreciate that that's a game that became a good series. Though it's odd enough, I do notice that that game doesn't show up on like horror game lists, which just to me is intriguing because my first immediate thought would be is it's a variant on zombies, but it's definitely not what I would say as games go, something that people look at and really think of right away when they look at horror games,
Yeah,
which is intriguing to me. And now I say this having not played it, so eventually I will play it and be able to formulate more um, solidified opinions on it.
yeah.
So, but it is interesting to me because at a quick glance, I'd have said it comes off to me as I would think it would have been based off a horror game, and for it being turned into this successful show makes you think, oh, it's a successful horror game. But I have yet to see it in like a top 10 list, personal or otherwise. You know,
That's very interesting.
yeah, yeah. Which on the reverse side though is I always see Resident at least one Resident Evil game in a top 10 list, and yet in the film adaptations, they range from ridiculous to camp to not bad. And again, that's a whole
uh,
different topic that I could go into. So we'll stick
yeah,
a knife or something in that. But yeah.
put a knife in it.
But yeah, horror games to me, they're just I will say this, more than any other genre out there, it was a genre I didn't get into for a long time and had no interest. And now that I'm into it, I'm like, this is such a layered genre in a way that almost no other genre is.
Mhm.
Like other genres can dip their toes in horror and will, but horror is one of those genres where it's like, oh, we can dip more than a toe in and still be horror because we can just go off the fucking rails and say, how do we make this wrong? Like fantasy, but it's all trying to murder you, or fantasy, but scary. It's one of those things where I think because horror a lot of ways plays on very personal player experience, Not that they necessarily are picking out individual player experiences, but because it relies a lot on the perception of the player, it has the ability to translate over to other subgenres, like science fiction, like action, like puzzles, because it's really like, oh yeah, frankly, anything can be scary if you frame it right.
Yeah, can be.
So
That is very true. Um,
it fascinates me.
hmm,
Now I have to ask, I think since we've been going on about horror games and what we like and then what makes a good one,
yeah.
what would you say are your top three horror games, like your three favorites,
Oh no.
and why?
Um, top three and why?
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm gonna
that
pose
is
all the
tough.
tough questions now.
That is genuinely a tough question.
Why do you think I
One of the
asked you
things
first?
I know, one of the things I have difficulty with anything in this regard is a top blank.
I would say it's top
And
three, but they don't have to be in any particular order. It's just like
well,
if you're gonna pick three favorites, maybe.
well, order or not, um, I have trouble with that because I always feel unsatisfied with the answers. Because I'm always like, well, then there's this, and then there's this, and then there's this, and sometimes it changes,
Um,
sometimes it changes back.
well, maybe we
Um,
say, mm, if we're
well, I'll
saying,
still
I,
give an
I
answer.
would say, if let's put a little more context to it. So, if somebody who is curious or wants to like take a me who is open, like me from a few years ago, open to the concept of horror and is looking to experience the genre, doesn't have an exact parameter of what they're looking for. They just want to experience good horror. And now we know that's subjective. We know that can be highly, highly subjective. But one of the ways we learn and explore what works for us is by looking at what works for other people. So if you had, say, me with no experience in horror come up to you and say, I'm curious about getting started in the horror genre or playing some horror genre games, what would be like the first three you would recommend I try?
Ah, that's
to
a
a,
really
to a
good
total
question,
noob in
and I'm
horror.
glad I'm glad you asked it. Um, let's see. What would I recommend? I think one would be Fatal Frame. And the reason for Fatal Frame is that you are not armed with traditional weaponry. You are facing off against ghosts. And ghosts can go through walls and other objects. There's no real running away per se. And the camera that you have is your only weapon. And the only way that you can change the strength of that essentially is through getting things like different types of film, which also affect different ghosts differently, and taking their picture, which
Mm.
means that you have to essentially like stand still while you're taking their picture and they're coming at you.
Don't die, but
Um,
oh, you might die.
and it's still got like bosses and stuff like Resident Evil and such. It's got those kind of style of controls and all of that. It's just set in this world that's really creepy, and it's yeah, you feel powerless in a way because you don't have traditional weapons. Even though weapons like that wouldn't affect ghosts, because ghosts don't care if you swing at them with a baseball bat. Um, but with a camera, you can do a lot of things with it as far as like, taking pictures and whatnot. And I believe it's third person. And then when you're going into the camera, it goes into first. So it's really interesting that way. Second, I would say, at least for now, is perception.
Hmm.
Um, it's got a really great opening. It's got a lot of really good atmosphere. It's genuinely terrifying in that you cannot see anything, and that is part of the thrust of it, is experiencing things in this different way where the only thing that you have is audio, and you better have some really good headphones to help you.
If your audio
Uh,
doesn't work, you might be fucked.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Because there's a lot of really, really important cues that you get from the audio. That is very important. Um, third, third is kind of tough. Um, I, mm, I will say, I will say Simulacra. And the reason for Simulacra is one, I love FMV games. I'm not going to shy away from that. I love them. Two, uh, it is a different style of game wherein you are investigating whose phone this is that you have. And it's a detective game, and you have to sleuth around with this person's phone that is all the while kind of freaking out a little bit, and then like some weird shit happens, and you learn a lot of like horrifying realizations involved in this world that I will not spoil. Um
I have yet to play this game, and I will be playing
and
it. So I appreciate that.
and each one, I think even Pipe Dreams, which is free. That one is for free. Um but I believe each one of them has four different endings depending on your choices. And your choices depend on things that you tell people, certain things that you interact with, and just like certain little decisions that you make that may seem innocuous at first. But then when you make them, you kind of realize the weight of your decisions. Um, it's really cool. The whole series, the trilogy, Pipe Dreams, and even the prototype sim, which should still be findable on the internet. If people are, if you void walkers out there are curious, since we're calling the world the void,
I
we'll
love
call
it.
the people
Voidwalkers.
void walkers. Since if you void walkers out there are very curious about it, you might be able to find sim uh as downloadable. It's like their prototype of Simulacra and what Simulacra became. Um, and especially Pipe Dreams. Pipe Dreams has a message to it, and I really like that, um, in particular. But all of them are very interesting. They explore people. They explore like who people are, what they're doing, why they're doing what they do, and no one's really a good guy.
Hmm.
People are people, and it's very fascinating. So yeah, Simulacra. There you go.
All
How
right.
about you?
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, I mean, I'm sure people, our Voidwalkers, can probably guess what a few of my favorites are just by what I refer to a lot. I will say, hands down, I will recommend Evil Within to people, um, especially if you. I would say, I'm trying to think how to best describe what you're looking for with it. I would just say that it's, especially if you want something that doesn't spend a lot of time um setting up. A game that doesn't spend a lot of time, that just kind of jumps right in. And if you're okay with having something that doesn't always make sense, that, but you also don't want to spend a lot of time. Like to me, one of the things that I think is brilliantly done in the game is that surprisingly, or I didn't really realize it right away the first time I played it, it didn't really register with me that the game is actually more linear than it appears because they frame a lot of situations and a lot of what you do in a way that you don't feel like you're being directed in where to go. And then you suddenly realize, wait, I'm being told where to go. But it just doesn't really sink in right away that the game is linear, which I think if you're looking for something that is, doesn't feel linear or doesn't or that doesn't feel overtly linear. but you don't want to spend a lot of time on something that's super open world puzzle driven, solve this, go around. So if you want something that's a little more direct but doesn't make you feel like, oh, I it's so direct they're handing it to me. Like 3 Nemesis or the remake of Resident Evil 3, I'd say is a lot more overtly linear than Evil Within. Evil Within is less, partly because it's unwrapping this strange mystery that you don't understand. So one for story, because it is fascinating to me see a story unfold, but maybe in a more non-conventional way. And also, I will hands down say for world design. World design, visually, I think it's a very rich game, and I think the sound design is brilliant in it. And frankly, I absolutely love that that game does not shy away from being brutal to the main characters. So if you fuck up, it is entirely possible to blow Sebastian into literally a bunch of dismembered limbs. And it's not overly in your face graphic, but to me, it's just an element of, yeah, we're not going to hold back. You walked into a bomb. Now you're in pieces. And but I think I love that element of the mortality of the characters, you know, you know. So, but I do think also just in general that it's a fairly well balanced game. It's well crafted between environment and action. And so it melds the element of you're not playing a character who's totally without weapons. You still got the conventional, like you've got different weapons in this, but there's still limitations on how much you can advance them. You really can't max out much unless you're doing a second run, a second and third run of the game, because that's when you start unlocking more. So I think just in terms of, kind of a more typical, slightly linear survival horror game, I really like Evil Within. I genuinely really like that one. Um, gets more difficult after that. I would say of the other ones, okay, it's kind of a given that one of my other favorites would be a Resident Evil. I would say at this point that it is actually probably Resident Evil 2 remake right now that is one of my other favorites. I'm a little on the fence, like in terms of horror games. Now, and this is where I'm a little bit on the fence because I love 2 remake as a game. If you're looking to experience more horror, then I would maybe push more towards Resident Evil 7 because that's probably a little bit more heavy on the horror. But what I think 2 gets that 7 doesn't, and we already touched on it, is that the characters are characters. Again, Leon's a character, and it's excluding anything else in the world lore about Leon from all the predating games, all the films, whatever. Fuck all that for the moment. Just in the context of Resident Evil 2 Remake, you have a more fully fleshed out set of characters. And so I'm invested in the characters, and I love the way that the game utilizes very logical world elements. He's got different weapons he collects. He's got weapons that make sense because he's, a cop. You have characters you encounter. It's got a lot of, essentially, it uses a lot of cinematic elements while still being quite playable and having that puzzle element where you can do a straight run. If you watch a speed run on that game, it is very boom, 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 hit these places. You only hit what's essential. But if you're going more completionist, there's a lot more to do. And then you have to be strategic. And if you accidentally kind of activate Mr. X too early, then you're trying to do all this stuff while hopefully not getting jumped by this guy because he can show up whenever the fuck he wants. And it's just like, what the fuck? So I enjoy that one because there's a lot of layers in it. There's a lot of different ways it can go. There's a lot of diversity within the game in terms of just the decisions you can make. And again, I think for me, it comes back to with that one, it's a story. You're very invested in these people, you know. Um, I also enjoy the fact that, they have elements like you think you've killed the zombie, but then it stands back up later. And so there's elements of you think it's fine, and then suddenly you're getting jumped because something grabbed you. Because no, you didn't actually kill that one enough. So, and even things like if you're on these floors, you need to walk because if you're not walking, there's a licker. But oh, look, Mr. X showed up in that same hallway. Now you need to run. Now the licker's awake and Mr. X is chasing you. You gotta die. So there's and intensity because that game has a lot of elements in it that are not predictable. And I think that is something that helps keep it really interesting, especially because you are also trying to like find the components you need to solve these puzzles while dealing with these other elements. So, um, it's also just pretty. I won't lie. It's a pretty game. I like pretty games. uh, so now third one I would recommend to folks. I'm a little bit torn on what I would say my third favorite would be. On one hand, and this might be a little controversial because I never finished it, I think the original, as in the very original PlayStation Silent Hill. Now, I've never finished Silent Hill. I ran into a point the first time I tried to really play it, not the 10 minutes I played and got too scared and turned it off. But years ago, but not too many, as many years ago, I tried to actually play it and I got a bit stuck at one point and moved on to another game for a while to take a break. And it's that computer has since been wiped because it had other issues. So I would have to go literally download another emulator, find a ROM, all of this stuff. So I have never finished it, but what I was very impressed with, especially, and again, this was all at the beginning, was uses of the environment. So if you want a game that sets up atmosphere, it is going to do that. You're going to be confused as fuck some of times, and you can't always predict when you're going to suddenly be in like the demon monster hellish part of Silent Hill. Like it's not always predictable, but then it is. And I think it's a game that's worth experiencing, especially if you want to see how effective horror can be without necessarily having top end graphics. And I think that's the thing that I really appreciate about it. But like I said, I'm a little bit torn because there's that one. And again, I said slightly controversial because I never finished it. So I probably should finish it before I really decide whether or not I'd recommend it. The other side, I would actually recommend Dead by Daylight. And my reason for that one is it is a little atypical horror in that it's not like, you're going through this world of this, but it's taking what I would say is a conventional team exercise or individual exercise, but let's look at it from the survivor perspective, a team exercise, and creating a teamwork based challenge, but in the context of horror. And because it is a co op style game, but one where the killer is also played by an active player, like, unless you have the odd occasion where you actually are playing against like an AI bot, it's never predictable. You never can fully predict what's going to happen because it all depends on who you're playing against. And 9 times out of 10, you don't know the people you're playing with. You don't know how experienced the person playing the killer is. It could be an experienced, you could have somebody who's really experienced at playing a killer they've never played before. So now they're learning the mechanics of that character. All the killers have different mechanics and advantages. And each environment you go into has its own advantages. Like certain environments don't run through the grass because if you're running through the grass is going to move and now the killers can spot you. Other ones, the grass is great cover. It's so variable in what your experience can be. So no one matches the same as the next one. And I absolutely love that because you really cannot predict what will happen. Even if you only play the same characters every time, because everybody else in game is still an actual person, you can never fully predict what is going to happen and how it's going to go. It is not a predictable you will win or you will lose. I have had so many matches, and I pretty much strictly play as Survivor because to me that is so much fun. But I have had matches where I have survived, where we've all survived, where it's been like badass easy. I've had matches that were the Leon clusterfuck of chaos that somehow miraculously survived. I've also had ones where we've all gotten our asses handed to us and in under no uncertain terms, like unceremoniously handed to us even. Where the killer just goes, fuck it, I'm murdering you right here, right now. I'm not going to be nice. So it's a very community-based horror game. And I would say for somebody who's looking, if especially if you're looking for horror games that are maybe have a more social aspect, but you're not obligated to sit there and actually talk to people, it's very fun. If you like playing things like Capture the Flag, I would generally say you will like playing Dead by Daylight. If you like doing haunted mazes, going to haunted mazes where people can where you can go with friends and people can jump out and scare you, you will like Dead by Daylight. It's just they're not just going to jump out and scare you. They might actually like put you on a hook and kill you. But if you like going to haunted mazes at Halloween time and you like playing like Capture the Flag or like frankly dodgeball, you're probably gonna like Dead by Daylight.
I've played dodgeball with many a huntress.
Exactly, yeah. And see, that's where I would say Dead by Daylight. It's a different experience from other horror games, but it is one that is just fun. And I think that comes kind of back to the bottom line with horror and what makes a good horror game is, frankly, if you're not enjoying it, you can be scared. But if you're not enjoying it, I mean, people who like horror movies. They enjoy them. So even if they're getting so freaked out, and if you're not having fun, then you're missing out.
Yeah. I think that's a great way to put it. If you're not having fun, it's not a good horror game.
Nah, then it's just scary or whatever it is. It's just not, it's just a game.
It's depressing.
Yep,
I didn't come here for ennui. I came here for fun.
I know. I came for funsies, and that's why it's really fun when I explain, like the first time I explained to my therapist that I'm like, yeah, because it's really hard to think, it's a great stress reliever because I don't think about the shit going on in my life when a zombie's trying to murder me. I just focus
Very
on the
true.
zombie, and it's great. And then it's funny because other people are laughing at the fact that I suck at this. you know, I mean,
Yeah.
you've seen my stream. The general reaction when I have a major freak out is usually lol. She's scared. Lol.
Yep.
I mean, what
Or
was that?
when the audience scares you.
Oh God, yeah, yeah. That's why why I added sound alerts in so that if the game wasn't quite hitting it, you guys could still have fun. And man, you, Lone, and Steve all really got into that. Actually, so did Anthony too.
Yeah.
You guys all got into the ooh, we control back.
Shout out to the Lone Otaku, Anthony Gaming, and Steve.
Yes, they are awesome folks. Awesome
Not
regular
shot caller
supporters.
Steve.
There's a street here in Los Angeles called Burnside, and every single time I drive past it,
That's funny.
why is it called? If they ever I do hope they remake Code Veronica just because there are some Code Veronica was fun, but Code Veronica had some truly ridiculously campy characters. And
Yeah.
just to see what they would do with Steve and with like what was it? Alexia and her brother or whatever. Like it- yeah. I
That
mean,
exactly.
especially after seeing what 4 Remake managed to do with Salazar, which I was really wondering how 4 Remake, being that we knew from 2 Remake was much grittier, much darker, much more serious. I part of me really wondered, is 4 Remake gonna manage to pull off the camp, that the ridiculous cheese and camp that is also in the original that makes the original 4 so fun? They did. I can't believe they managed it, but they did.
It's great.
Oh my gosh. Oh, it's
Well,
great. So
in that case,
I think
I
we've
guess so where can our Voidwalkers find you?
my Voidwalkers, my lovely little Voidwalkers. If you want to come watch me speak into the void or watch the games I play while I speak into the void, because I'm still trying to determine why my camera likes to stall periodically with that, and yet it has no issues doing things like this. I don't understand it. But I am on Twitch. Lady Hyacinth is in the flower, 57, 57. I play games good, or let's play games good. let's be real. I'm usually playing, especially now and I blame you entirely for this, Dave, now that I'm into speed running a little bit too, or I'm starting to figure out speed running. It's a lot of Resident Evil, but part of it is because I am preparing to do a 36-hour run sometime next year and try to play through the 8 main chapter games in ideally 24 hours, but that would mean getting the average game down to probably 3 hours, which I'm not sure if I'll be able to pull that off for some of them. So I'm saying 36 and hoping for less, and then eventually I'll aim for 24-hour run. But a 24-hour run would mean finishing each of those games on average in 3 hours or less, which isn't kind of insane, especially because like I've only played Village once. And that is definitely right now not a 3-hour game for me.
Yeah.
It's definitely more than a 3-hour game. you know. I might be able to get 2 remake though to an hour. So I can get that down. But yep, I'm on Twitch and then I'm also on TikTok, mostly sharing my Twitch videos now. And if you go way back to the beginning, you see a few of my dog and some crafty stuff because whatever. And then I discovered that more people enjoyed watching my Twitch videos there. So if you look up Elkshire, ELKSHIRE on TikTok, you'll see highlights from past streams, moments from past streams, clips that mostly were taken by you, Dave, and Lone, our buddy Lone. The most recent being that time it looked like a zombie threw my grenade back at me. That's great. I know what happened. It bounced off the wall, okay? But it really does just kind of look like a zombie just tossed it back at me and it blew up. So, and now, Dave, where can our lovely Voidwalkers find you?
Well, all you lovely and wonderful Voidwalkers can find me at Twitch, Sheriff_Flynn, like Errol Flynn, but you know, uh,
But he gonna
more
arrest him.
sheriff. Yeah. Where I typically play a surprising amount of horror games myself. I'm currently running through Blasphemous 2. I'm planning to do another Year of the FMV where I play a bunch of FMV based games. Um, some of which are not horror because sometimes horror can be a little tough in that genre. We'll talk about it. But others have horror elements. I've added a few new ones to my docket, so that's exciting. Some are more frustrating than others, but that's beside the point. I also play Dead by Daylight. Typically, I play killer, occasionally survivor. I'm more of a killer main. I run around as Dredge, Huntress primarily, but others also have my eye.
And
I haven't touched it in a little bit.
And I can confirm that you play Huntress because the very first time when our friends and I were new to Dead by Daylight, you were like, "I shall teach you," and you played Huntress, and then proceeded to go and murder all of us.
I've gotten much better since then. I've been able to get probably about 12 to 15 orbitals over the time I've taken Huntress on more seriously.
Nice.
Which is amazing.
Yeah, I usually main as I used to main as Dwight in Survivors until the Resident Evil chapters came out, and now I pretty much main as Leon. I'm not gonna lie. Yeah, I'm one of those people. I main as Leon. It's fun.
I think it's even funnier because you fall into stereotypes of Leon players.
What? Okay, now this I gotta hear. I want to hear more of this. Wait, the stereotype. What is the stereotype?
They're kind of goofballs. They pull off things on accidents, or they like goof up on stuff. I
feel like that also lines up with Dwight too.
Yeah, a little bit.
So Dwight players become coward. Yeah, but I mean, Dwight players become Leon players.
Yeah.
What can I say? It's also really funny when he gets hurt and Leon is going and like doing the healing if I'm healing, and Leon's moan is
yeah.
I don't know why it cracks me up, but it does.
Well, it's because they're all trying to have sex with each other. Seriously, like if you listen to them,
Oh
they
yeah.
sound more like they're having sex rather than being hurt and trying
Oh,
not to die.
I would absolutely, I would 100% love to be present on all the Foley recordings for those sounds. Because it's basically go stand in the booth and pretend you're having sex with somebody audibly. That's pretty much all that it is. I would
But,
pay to see those moments unfold.
like the one that people point to the most is Rebecca. Just listening to her, it's crazy.
Yeah, I will admit too, I have attempted to killer. I am not good at killer. I really am not.
Just
I
takes practice.
it's more of a it's more fun though as survivor. At least I feel like it's a little more even playing field. Whereas as killer, it's just like I'm gonna fucking die, or I'm gonna fucking suck at this every time.
Fair enough.
But yes. Oh man. Well, I think we've reached a excuse me, tickle in the throat, a reasonable end to today's conversation. So we shall be back with our next episode when we so choose to be.
Very optimistic. Um,
Can you
yeah.
tell my train of
So
thought just went and goodbye?
it did. But yeah, you can follow us wherever podcasts are sold.
Mm-hmm.
We are around.
Mm-hmm.
We dropped our various places where we're usually streaming at.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so until next time, I have been Dave.
And I am Liz, and we are
The Confabulators. We'll get the timing down.
Confabulating.
Don't forget to ask your barista what that means.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, make sure they know that if they don't, they need to go find this out. This is important stuff. Very.
The Confabulators is hosted by Liz Strauss and David Bockenkamp. Editor is E.W. Klein. Theme music is Oh Heavens by Cassidy B. Composer and artist, cbrva.card.co.